You're better off now. Do you get this jaggery, the one you ate in Danda?
Yes,
You get in England? I never saw this jaggery.
yeah, in Indian shops.
Indian shops, but not in English shops.
Not in English shops. Indian shops in India.
But not in English shops as such. So this jaggery is a very good thing when you come out from somewhere like dusty places or something, your sore throat, you take a little bit of jaggery and drink some water. It's a very good idea. See, one should take two simple medicines, because if you take two antibiotics, this, that nonsense, then you become very weak and you have to, it has a reaction, then you have to take something else for the reaction. It's a funny thing. It is antibiotic. It is a bio means life. It is anti-life.
And the one about mycin.
ये
मेरा ले लो, शॉल ले लो.
No, I don't want her at all. Tell her that because it's not work out. She's got small shanks and
I didn't ask her. Do you want me to ask her
if there was also a relationship between tomorrow's puja and full moon and so on.
Should I have to boast about myself? Yes. As you know, it is Parabrahma, that is the complete divine power, or the Holy Ghost is the complete divine, is the complete desire of God, which has taken a form. Now imagine, God is just a spectator. He is not one who is going to create anything. He is just going to destroy actually. Because if he doesn't like the spectacle, he can destroy and the desire disappears. Like any desire you have within yourself. The complete desiring power within it. Without that, what are you? You are just watching your desire working it out. So this desire power is the left-sided thing, as you say, and then first it has to come to desire. The desire becomes then the action power, and action and desire together start evolving things. So everything is inclusive in that, whether you say sun, moon, stars, everything. But the moon is the desire. Ultimately, when it also collapses back, first of all, it works out, it evolves, and then again when it is reversed, you see, then it goes back to desire, desire disappears into the spectator, and the whole thing becomes a Parabrahma thing. So the identification with one or the other cannot be said, it's everywhere. If it is everything, how can you identify with anything else? Moon is one of the symbols. Moon is one of the symbols. Why? Because according to Sahaja Yoga, we reached a stage where you touch the Sadashiva in the symbolic form. See, or if you can say that after getting realization, if you see the abstract form of God, then we say, after reaching your Brahmarandra, you cross over your limbic area and then you go to Ardha Bindu. Ardha Bindu is the moon. Moon is the spirit. Because Shiva also wears the moon on his head. Sadashiva also wears the moon on his head. So moon is the spectator, isn't it? Sun is the working part. He works, and it reflects on the moon. So let's start with that. So every symbol is the same, and now why we use the moon?
Shri Mataji.
Shri Mataji.
It's amazing. The talk that we just had, a very, very short excerpt, was Action and Desire from Amrita on the 6th of February in Nipar in India. And Shri Mataji is talking about moon, and today happens to be Sharad Purnima or Kojagiri Purnima. So it's amazing how she just works it all out so spontaneously. Thank you so much for joining us, Geoffery Godfrey, and taking the time to share your experiences, your golden memories with Shri Mataji herself. Would you please start with your seeking journey? When did it begin and where were you?
Well, there was I guess I look back and I've been seeking since I was 13 or 14. I didn't classify or name it as seeking, but it was going on. I was able to borrow a telescope off my brother and would often look in the night sky at the planets, which would draw me in and get me thinking about the cosmos, the universe, and the the enormity of it all and how small we all are down here on Earth. I remember one occasion, and I used to look at the moon quite a lot because, of course, it's the nearest heavenly body, and you could make out some of the craters and the geography on it, which was very exciting. And I remember once as I was scanning, I came across sort of what you'd term probably an asteroid, probably traveling around the planet Mars. There's a belt of asteroids, and we often get the shooting stars a couple of times a year in July and August, where we cross that belt and some of the fragments fall to Earth. But I came across one big lump of rock, and it was traveling through space, and I was just tracking it with my telescope, and it just looked like a primordial hunk of just rock, and it just kind of put me in mind of creation and the sort of colossal forces at work as a young person. But then I became fascinated with the religion around me, Christianity, living in a country full of parish churches up and down the land. You'd see these spires reaching for the heavens, but gosh, what did it all mean? And it never really communicated with me. It always seemed to be a bit beyond my ken and understanding. And I remember even that I think studying not O level, but coming up to getting a report pre O level, we had one subject called religious studies.
Yes.
And it's all about Peter and Paul and Christianity and the parable of this, that, and the other. And I, in my report card, which the girls found very entertaining, my daughters found entertaining when it appeared at the bottom of a pile of papers, I'd got 15% out of 100 in religious education. So I really had it bad in that the thing that was going to draw my attention, I was terrible at school and couldn't grab hold of it. But perhaps the subject matter wasn't that inviting.
Exactly.
And I guess, the part of me got a sense of incompleteness, or that, and as many, people have experienced, you live a cosseted, protected life. You're protected by your family, and yet you can see out in the world there are difficulties, there are issues, there are troubles, and that tears at you, because in your heart you feel very soft and very you want everybody to be happy and skipping across a lawn full of daisies with the sun shining. but the world sadly isn't like that, and that tension doesn't go away, it doesn't get resolved, and you grow up and you're faced with new challenges. So seeking was there, and it was like, I thought, well, if I visit every church and take photographs and write things, then surely the truth will make itself known to me. A very kind of naive approach to understanding spirituality, and I thought by assessing and tabulating and counting up the number of spires, that somehow it would all come together for me. Never, of course, acted on any of that, but these thoughts whizzed through my head as I was hitchhiking up down the A1 between Yorkshire, where I was from, and London, and Hertfordshire, where I'd visit people, and when hitchhiking was allowed, when you could
Yes,
use
it's
your
safe to do so, yeah.
right Swadhisthana thumb for something other than feeling the temperature of your liver, you could hitch a ride. Of course, I don't think it's allowed so much nowadays. It's been risk assessed out of existence. Anyway, seeking went on, reading went on, and no doubt I, injured my headset by reading all sorts of nonsense across the years and looking under every rock. And I travelled out to Japan and had some interesting experiences on an expedition there, and sort of came across Zen Buddhism and Shugendo Buddhism, which is a mix between Shinto and Buddhism. Shinto being the Japanese indigenous tradition, sort of a religion based on animism, where mountains and rivers and brooks and trees and animals all are sort of infused with some spiritual quality and significance, and that people are living a little bit in consciousness towards nature and their environment, sort of recognizing they're part and parcel of the environment rather than separate, which we get much more in the Western traditions, where we're separate, we're human beings, we're important, and nature is just another thing to be used and controlled, and so on and so forth. So that was wonderful. And then I traveled out to the Americas and was there. Then I traveled to India. I guess in the Americas, I was searching and seeking and reading and seeing, of course, the plethora of all that was coming to America from other countries, particularly in the Orient, where the money was to be made in America. So, of course, all the gurus came and this, that, and the other, which Mother has spoken of on many occasions. And I was dissatisfied, and I was trying to meditate and learn, just do it by myself. And I remember one occasion I was sort of sitting cross-legged with my hands on my lap, going into deep meditation, or such as I thought, focusing on the wall in front of me, or whatever it might be. And I perceived sort of some ominous movement in my mind's eye, in my mind's eye, but 10 feet ahead, of some sort of creature or entity rustling in some bushes with red eyes. And it was kind of like, oh my goodness, a bit terrifying. But I was meditating, and slowly I began to become conscious it was going to fly towards me.
Right.
And I thought, gosh, it's going to try and enter me. And in that moment, this was pre-Sahaja, which makes it rather remarkable. In that moment, I just said, Shri Buddha, Shri Mahavira, Shri Jesus, protect me.
Right. Where were you?
That was in New York, in an apartment in New York with my Iranian friends I was living with at the time. One was Armenian, one was Iranian, and they used to call me the infidel, the non-believer, and tease me. And
so what happened then to that entity?
oh, what was wonderful was I sort of invoked Shri Jesus, Shri Buddha, Shri Mahavira, and that thing kind of came and was rebuffed. I was somehow projected, or
There was a shield around you, kind of.
And of course, I had no idea till I came to Sahaja Yoga the significance of Christ and Buddha and Mahavira occupying these spheres up here, which I could only marvel at later on once I'd settled into Sahaja. But I took a fright. I got a fright from that experimenting, and my center heart kind of took a fright, and like it became tight. And as I was still living in America, I eventually sort of, I used to work for a company called Dale Carnegie, and wonderful company, and I sat in Dale Carnegie's library, which was itself full of seeker and spiritual books and self.
Well, this book is a classic amongst the world over, isn't it? I can't remember the title, but yes.
So I sat in that library one evening after work, 7 o'clock, and I was just reading and looking at different texts and this, and it hit me that I've got to quit my job, and I can never take a job again until I find God. So there I was in sort of corporate America, suited and booted, with clients like Getty and IBM and this, that, and the other, Allstate Insurance in New York, and all these, down to the small mom and pop businesses, and I just thought, I've got to find God. and tears were rolling down my cheeks as I was expressing this to myself. And I then arranged a meeting with the president of the company, and who I, respected greatly, because I'd been able to work there for 4 years they'd sponsored me to work. I'd gone over as an intern, as a student, and then I was sponsored for however long. And I guess the next step would have been a green card. But I thought no, and so I left, and amicably, and then sort of traveled across America, Canada, then thought, got to go to India, of course, put my feet in India, and sort of look here and look there, and spent 2 months in India. And I remember being on the coast near Ganapatipuli around December. Of course, it was in Goa, which was a destination spot. And at one point, somebody stole my shoes. So for 6 days, I had no shoes. And I was just in contact with Mother India, paddling in the ocean. And on the other hand, I was feeling tremendous bliss. I thought, well, something I'm doing is working out. Had no idea that probably just up the coast, there were several hundred yogis at Ganapatipuli, with their feet in the ocean there. So
which year is
that was sort of 91, December 91, and I eventually left America and went back to America after, and I eventually left because this fright was taking hold of me, and I realized if I couldn't solve this thing I'd internalized, it would kill me. That was my words to myself. And so, but I didn't know what the solution was, and I kept reading, visiting libraries in the States. Then I transited back to the UK, and I was staying in East London in Mile End with an old friend I'd looked up from Japan called James Tomlinson, and we'd reconnected after 3 or 4 years, and we were living together, and we'd go out working every day, or I'd be going out into libraries, and sometimes I'd come into big books which were 2.5 feet tall and 18 inches wide, and I'd get them out and I'd be looking and photocopying all this research to do with Tree of Life, Kundalini, Coil, Water of Life, Holy Grail.
This is in America, right?
No, this was back in the UK. This was a continuation. I was doing that in America, the chakras, so on and so forth. So I knew the Kundalini, I knew the truth was in there somewhere. I just didn't know how to arrange all the ducks in an appropriate line to grab hold of it. And I kept photocopying. I had these box files, the coil, the Kundalini, the chakras, the water of life, the tree of life, the river of life, all these different folders with whatever I could get. So there I am in East London, and mid-afternoon one day, looking at this massive book. You had to put it on a rostrum to read it because it was about so big. And as I was reading through, I came across something which was challenging or upsetting the evolving theory that was slowly beginning to take shape in my head. How the system works, what the process was, and you'd read something, you'd begin, oh, is this it? And you begin to form a picture and a pattern and an idea of it, or a theory. And this thing contradicted a lot of that, and also thereby undermined a lot of the work I'd been, strenuously working on, preparing to get me to the finishing line. And my heart sank. My heart sank like, oh, this is blowing some of what I've been doing and the road I've been going down. It's blowing it out the water. And then what I did next was very interesting. I looked over my left shoulder. I looked over my right shoulder to see if anybody was watching. And could I close the book up, put it on the shelf, and pretend I'd never seen it? And then I just burst out laughing. Because the realization dropped. What's more important, my little pet theory or the absolute truth? And so that just took me into laughter. And I, of course, then photocopied the thing, took it in, incorporated it. And while staying at James's house, a friend came also to stay, and each day we'd compare notes, and he'd be going out looking for a job and a career and filling out CVs and stuff, and I'd be going out looking at all the spiritual books, and every day we'd come back and compare notes, what we'd found. And one evening he said, "Oh, so he became, he came to know what I was into and what I was looking for. He said, "Oh, I found this in the back of Time Out, this picture of this Indian lady." and I looked at it in the back of Time Out and the what's on. It's a very small, sort of 1.5 inch by 1 inch little advert, picture of Shri Mataji, the black and white Adi Shakti picture, with the words spontaneous self-realization, Kundalini awakening. And my first reaction was, well, they can't be doing that in London. That's 7th century Patanjali in India. What are they talking about? So that was, and so, but I cut it out and I put it in my wallet. And the next week he said, did you go? Did you go? No, I didn't go. But eventually, after a couple of weeks, I did my way to Flood Street, where the meetings still are to this day. But it was just started in 91, maybe. And I rocked up on Tuesday, the 28th of January, 92, and came into the room and downstairs. It was downstairs. It was taking place, and of course there's 15 or 20 people there, you might say. And during the workshop, a yogi came to work on me, and my whole system started to move. And first I became conscious of myself rocking backwards and forwards, then side to side, and then circumambulating.
It's like a pendulum.
Like kind of left, forward and back, left and right, and then in a circle. And I'm going, and I'm thinking, interesting. This isn't me. This isn't my muscles. This is some other force, some other power. And I thought, is this what that thing is? Self-realization, Kundalini awakening, which they've talked about. So while that was going on, meanwhile, the person behind me working I could sense was getting a bit concerned. And the person was Mathew Cooper, who now lives in Australia. And he's like, "You all right, mate? You all right?" I said, "Yeah, I'm fine. Carry on, do what you're doing. I'm good. No need," because he was probably going, "We've got a right one here. He's about to implode," And slowly I felt the energy rise to, guess where? The point where I had that constriction, the center heart. And it was pulsating, boof, boof, boof. And then all of a sudden it went boof, and all this heat flowed out through my upper torso, my head, out through my arms, and the heart kind of released. And then I just felt this tremendous bliss, and on my hands, the wind blowing. And, Matthew's saying, you're right, mate. I said, you just carry on, whatever you've got to do. I'm fine, don't worry about me. And I was just marveling. This is what Kundalini awakening is. I had the words for understanding, but my head was going, but how can this be so? We're in Chelsea now, just off the King's Road in West London, This can't be right. And also, that I'd traveled the whole world looking to this thing in America and Japan and India, and lo and behold, who's all I had to do was look in the Time Out magazine. What a fool was I? And so you have all these strange things bubbling up. But I didn't fully know if it was the cat's whiskers at that point, but I was certainly down with the experience of what I was experiencing. And then I felt the tension slowly just return to my center heart. And I had another realization. I thought, so this is just the beginning, the awakening, the sprouting, whatever. But there's more work to be done now. There's more work to carry on. There's to clear it, but it certainly had moved a good portion of what was a blockage, and yes, but it couldn't all go in one hit, and there would be more work to be done on the center. What I came to understand eventually was the center heart. And so yeah, I then proceeded to walk around and attend meetings, and got a few invites to a few ashrams in those early days for a meal. Because suddenly I was that new person who'd come along, and he seemed to be a bit of a live wire, and he's apparently in a state of bliss, and what's all that about? And so yeah, I was enjoying that, I guess we call it the honeymoon period of being drenched in vibrations, and whilst you were finding your feet and trying to acclimate. And so that for me, it was all fireworks and lightning bolts and wonderful. Years later, I lived with Mathew in Ealing ashram in West London when it was really primordial. But we became roommates in the boys' room upstairs. There was just the two of us at one point, and Finn was also there. And but a time later he said he was really annoyed with me because I'd seemed to be having such a good time on my first visit, and he revealed that he'd come to Sahaja Yoga for 4 or 5 months and not felt anything. He just kept, because he felt it was something was good, but he hadn't necessarily felt all the things being referred to, and that struck me, and I thought, oh, and I often share that with new seekers at a meeting. I say, if you're feeling something, and then if you're not, and then I'll tell them Matthew's story, that it's okay if you're not feeling anything straight away. It can come in the fullness of time. Perhaps there's a blockage that's clearing, and then suddenly it'll go, ba-dum, So that was realization. So I kept attending Tuesday night, and I went to a few other meetings, and it took me a while to realize I was beginning to abandon my guru shopping, seeking, library visiting, and beginning to acclimate more to comprehending the very fuzzy and poor sound quality videos we were watching, and with Shri Mataji with the big bindi, and
the VHS tapes,
slowly gravitating more and more upon Shri Mataji, and the significance of the picture and the video and this, that, and the other. And so that was early days, and within a few weeks, I was invited to Shudy Camps on a Saturday. So now, so January 28th, by March the 5th or 10th or whatever it was, I was at Shudy Camps, and I was picked up at the Haverhill, whatever it's called, railway station, and driven to Shudy Camps, and works were going on there. And I remember meeting Douglas at the Teapot. Douglas was one of the original 7, of course, in the UK, and he kind of came up to me and sort of looked me up and down, and all right, who are you then? And he took my hand, and he put his hand onto my hand, and sort of rotated on my palm and said, "Oh, I see. This is what you've done. This seeking, you've done that." And it was like he was about to tell me what I'd had for breakfast that day, and it was a bit alarming, because he was just feeling stuff with me. I thought, okay, that's rather impressive, because everything he said was true.
Yes.
I felt naked at the teapot. I said, "Can we have some tea, please?" And then I was up on the roof with Mathew, and he was doing the lead flashing on Shudy Camps around the chimney stacks. Nothing I'd ever become acquainted with, and I was helping him. So we'd be up there in the gods doing that, and in the ensuing weeks between realization and that moment, I'd been to a few ashrams. I'd been to Chelsham Road. I'd been to Hampstead in North London. And at Chelsham Road, I was shown in the sacred cupboard miracle photographs. And this was going to be a rite of passage. Can he make it past the miracle photographs? Or is that the last we'll see of him? So I remember looking at all those and being quizzed, at Chelsham Road. And Mathew up on the roof with the lead hammer in hand is saying, "So you saw the miracle photographs at Chelsham Road, didn't you?" I said, yes. And what did you make of all that then? And I said, well, it seemed to be showing Shri Mataji at the center of a group of luminous beings, and there she seemed to be in the middle, and all the others were attending on. Well, and what do you think about that? What does that make her? I said, well, that makes her God, really, doesn't it? And then he was kind of reaching for a bit more lead, and he was saying, so how do you feel about that? I said, I'm fine with that. I'm okay with that. Again, I could see it was a bit miffed that I was just so nonchalant about, accepting that possibility. After 5 or 6 weeks, and then I was going to the Flood Street meeting every Tuesday, and then I think probably about April, I don't know, 14th, 15th, whatever, I went there, whenever the date was on that year, and I arrived there, and there's Tish, Paddy Martin's sister, who's no longer around, but she was there, and I was there, and we were setting up, and she said, well, who's going to do the meeting tonight? And I said, well, where are all the yogis? She said, oh, they've all gone to Heathrow Airport to see Shri Mataji.
Oh.
And I said, what? And she's traveling through UK on the way to Italy. And she said, Tish said, I'm not doing the meeting, so you'll have to do the meeting. So now there I was. So it was only sort of less than 2 months, and I did my first Sahaja Yoga meeting at Flood Street. and have been doing them ever since. Can't get rid of me.
Good.
And then we later on in April, the UK, when Cabella was bought in Guru Puja 91, that was the first puja. For the new season, the UK were given Sahastrara Puja for 92 and 93 before changing to Navaratri in 94, and the Austrians were given Sahastrara Puja. So sort of towards the latter part of April, 3 cars, 4 guys in each car, we drove all the way down to Cabella with tools and equipment and everything, and we began setting up the hangar, the stage up there at the top of adjacent to the house,
on
a flat piece of land. And we were building toilets out of thin tree trunks, you might say, to form a structure, scaffold boards with a hole in it, a blue piece of tarpaulin would make the door.
Right.
And some overhead nonsense contraption as the cistern. And this was at the top of the hill, and Duilio was there saying we've got to dig a trench to allow the stuff to flow down the hill. And it was very primordial what we were doing. We were building tables, trellis tables from floorboards. So we didn't even have like pop-up tables. We built them, we manufactured them from wood, recycling wood, and built tables so that there was serving tables for food. And anyway, we were there for sort of 10-12 days before Sahastrara Puja, which that year I think was a bit later in May, like May 9th or 10th or something. But having arrived in Cabella, Shri Mataji received us into her big living room there, which everybody knows, of course, is still there. And she and this was the first time I'd met Shri Mataji in person. So
your very first meeting with Shri Mataji in person.
I was introduced. Oh, Shri Mataji, this is Geoffrey. He's a new yogi. And Shri Mataji kind of looked at me, and I kind of looked back, and suddenly I was in this staring contest with Shri Mataji. I was just looking, and she was just looking, and eventually the intensity and the power, and I realized to lower my eyes and just enjoy the carpet for a few moments as an alternate. And that part of my seeking, I realized, is I always wanted to get close in to any teacher, any guru, to discern and check out, are they the real deal?
Yes.
I didn't know that at the time, but that was part of the driving force within my seeking. And I had certainly suffered enough through reading and going down all the dead ends and cul-de-sacs that I wanted, for my part, to verify and check out, was this the real deal, such that I could perhaps then indicate that to others so they wouldn't have to go through the trauma and the books and the nonsense I'd gone through in my seeking journey. So in that moment, it was like I was really looking at Shri Mataji, and
what was going on inside you? Because she's there looking at you.
Tremendous delight. What was going inside of me was kind of, I guess, a lot of stuff was going. Mother was with her X-ray vision, just looking up and down and going, "Oh, we've got a right one here," or who knows what. But then she asked me a question. She said, "What do you think of Sahaja Yoga?" Without thinking, I answered with an oxymoron, which is, and I said, "It's awfully wonderful, Shri Mataji." And of course, what an oxymoron is, it's the first word, it's awfully, is then removed from being negative to more amplify the second word, which is, it's incredibly wonderful. But so instead of saying it's incredibly wonderful, being an English person, awfully wonderful. And Shri Mataji laughed, and so yeah, we spent glorious days there working away, and Cabella, of course, was very primordial then.
Yes,
it was so primordial. I mean, down in the square there was maybe one shower bathroom available, and people used to nip into the back door of the hotel and use the shower and toilet without the hotel owners knowing. and the
Is
cafe,
that the poster, Alberga poster?
yeah, and the cafe, which is no longer open now, that had a toilet in it, and people would go in there and have a basin bath. And Cabella didn't know what had hit it, but we were suddenly, there we were as a migrant population arriving for a weekend and disappearing and flooding this small village and scrambling to attend to our daily needs of looking after ourselves and staying clean and tidy and whatnot, sleeping in all sorts of wonderful scenarios just to get our heads down. So people remember from those days how primordial it was, and nobody knew at that point, would this be a transitory thing or would it remain, because years later when I came to know Sasipi, of course, he was always sort of looking on at Shri Mataji's house purchases and thinking, and instead of them getting better and better in terms of, she'd buy one and renovate it, move it. Instead of then getting a ready renovated one, she'd buy one which was even more challenging each time. And it would be plunging deeper and deeper into, buying properties which were in tremendous states of dilapidation and needed resurrecting. And of course, that would always correspond to the realization that as she brought all the yogis in around to help in the rebuilding of these properties, that the real thing happening wasn't the renovation of the property, but was the renovation of those individuals in one way or another, and the hope that through them being renovated, that society itself might benefit in some way. And what better way of drawing people in and locking them in over time to give more time for the Pram Chaitanya to work, to have these longer projects rather than we get together for an event and we all go home and there's no time for the Pram Chaitanya to take the stage. It's not given sufficient opportunity to work and work out. So having these long, never-ending, elongated, always expanding projects was how Shri Mataji caused us to be able to interface with her and have some business to transact, some reason to even be in the same room with her.
Yes.
And to feel steady on our feet, because we were carrying the plank of wood. The important plank of wood had to be carried by somebody, and that gave us a niche, a foothold to be in front of Shri Mataji, because we were the plank carrier or whatever it might be. and so many people came into Shri Mataji's court to turn a screw, fit a carpet, change a light bulb, do all these things, and in so doing, of course, had the benefit of receiving Mother's darshan and witnessing her and improving themselves, even though they sometimes thought, why am I working so hard? But so that was
Shri Mataji's tireless work going on, invisible to the eye.
Yes.
And everyone on this project, because that castle in Cabella totally changed the whole atmosphere. It was quite a dilapidated, remote place in Italy, wasn't it?
Yes, and in a way, I'm just looking at even the purchase of that property. Shri Mataji was able to call upon somebody to provide the funds for the property to be bought, and without which the property wouldn't have been bought. And Shri Mataji later on was able to pay them back, and what a sweet thing that was. And even though that person has had a what can we say, an exciting career and all sorts of things happening in their life, in that moment they were the most crucial and valuable person in the universe, and to play their part in the play, that instrumental part in the play at that moment. So you hear these stories later on and you may have mental views, oh, this person's a bit this or this person, and you don't know all the other parts of the story, which if you did know, you might go, oh. you might say to your ego, be a little less assumptive and be a bit humble down a little bit, because there may be parts of the story you don't know, which are known by others. And that's the wonderful part of the jigsaw puzzle, that it's like looking back at the time of Christ. We're all still now trying to piece together what went on, who said what to who was there, who wrote something down, who didn't, who were the imposters, and of course the same has been true for us as a lived experience, that we've come into this sort of court of the divine, and we meet all these different seekers and players and personalities, and we've got no idea how they're interfacing with Mother in all sorts of different ways, and being helped, or offering help, and working stuff out, or having stuff worked out through them, the challenges they're facing, the crosses they are bearing, and whatever it might be. And so yeah, it's always fun to learn more, and that then lets you know there's always more to learn. And I remember in May of that year, so going on from Sahastrara Puja in 92, in May, unusually, Buddha Puja was called at Shudy Camps in England. And so a pendle was constructed on the back lawn, a tent pendle, and wonderful summer's sort of puja in, I think it was, early June, May, end of May. And one of the things that many people will know when I tell the story is that on that occasion, a wonderful, very large wooden elephant was presented to Shri Mataji, which took 6 grown men to lift onto the stage. And of course, many people will know that wonderful elephant because he guards the entrance to Shri Mataji's living room in Cabella. And that's the elephant, and that was presented in 92 at Shudy Camps. And you kind of think, where's this elephant going to be used? Where could one offer this little mantelpiece ornament and it's not going to look out of place? And of course, you see in Cabella, it's got the perfect place, just right. And
was it carved by yogis or not?
No, I think it was, obtained probably by going to, a warehouse where large objects, the art were available, whether it be large vases sometimes, or large lions. Remember the large lions and tigers and Dalmatians Shri Mataji had. Sometimes you'd see those come onto the stage at Guru Puja and different pujas. So, over the years, these things would be sought out by yogis and offered to Shri Mataji as a gift, and become part and parcel of the sort of the ornamentation surrounding a puja, the symbolic ornamentation. But thankfully, that elephant isn't carted onto the stage at each Ganesha Puja, because
don't have any, but it's right place actually.
I think we'd be using ambulances much more for back injuries if that was the case. And so, and now after that puja, which was a delightful puja, I was asked, could I stay behind at Shudy Camps? Because Sulba Flatman was going to stay behind there and cook for Shri Mataji, who was staying at Shudy Camps. But she was a bit trepidatious about being there alone in case Shri Mataji would ask for anything. So I was asked, could I stay Sunday and Monday and Tuesday, and just to be there as a gopher and whatnot. And so, yeah, I just relaxed into it. Otherwise, I'd have gone back to Ealing, where we were busily, working on the house there. So, oh no, I wouldn't have gone back to Ealing because Ealing wasn't even bought then. Gosh.
Exactly, I was thinking.
Yeah, that's analogy. So yeah, so that speaks to the story I'm telling now, because eventually, about 2 in the afternoon, Sulba sort of came out to the garden where I was, being deep, of course, and said, Shri Mataji's calling for you. Shri Mataji's calling. So off I went in. And we sat at, Shri Mataji invited me to sit at the big dining table. And she had the Times newspaper out and was kind of going through the ads for houses. And we were looking at different things, and she located one in West London. And she was asking me, is that near the Middlesex Hospital? Because my husband, CCP, will have to have some procedure done there in the future, and it'd be good to have a property near there. And I was saying, well, yeah, it's got a couple of campuses, Middlesex Hospital, but certainly all in West London. And so looked at the property, and of course, why not go for an estate agent? Well, the types of property which Shri Mataji was after were the types of property which estate agents couldn't take onto their books because they didn't have kitchens or toilets or windows. You couldn't get a mortgage on them. You needed to come in at the level of sort of a very determined DIYer or develop with a view to renovation and development. And so I rang it through to London and inquiries were made. And of course, that property became Ealing property. That was purchased probably August. A few months later, it all worked out. And was it in a primordial state when it was purchased? Yes, it was. And it certainly, I think, can we say it raised Sir CP's eyebrows when he saw it. Anyway, on that day, we were also then I was helping Shri Mataji sort things out. So this was like gifts for yogis. So you can imagine the scene. Many yogis have probably shared such scenes where a room strewn with boxes and suitcases and bags and full of Punjabis and saris and ties and cufflinks and shirts and blouses and everything. And Shri Mataji was sort of pointing and guiding and, do this, lift that, move that, what's that, take it out, what size is it, blah, blah, blah. This was going on to the point where you mentally, of course, you just were gone because there was no point trying to think or you just were doing, and you were much Shri arms and legs in a way. And as the evening grew on, eventually she said, "Oh, I've got a gift for you." And I looked at it, she said, "I've got a jumper." And I said, "Oh, no, mother, no, never. Jumpers never fit me. My shoulders are too broad and this, that, and the other." And I was sort of, my guilt was, "I'm not worthy, mother." Not of a jumper. And so she was like, just take it, just try it on, just try it. So I reluctantly received this gift from Shri Mataji and went out, and the day kind of drew to a close. And it was a summer evening, and I remember walking around the grounds of Shudy Camps, looking at the farmers' fields and all the crops wisping in the sun and the sky turning pink, and just marveling at this very special day I'd had with Shri Mataji. And I thought, I'll try the jumper on. It's getting a bit chilly now. And of course, it fitted, and it was a snug fit. And
of course,
which then, of course, sort of triggered me to, look to the heavens, and my eyes were beginning to moisten, and, just at the marveling at the proceedings of the day, and at mother's love and mother's care and mother's attention in whatever play she was involving you with. She was also involving you in that so that she could lift you up in ways unseen and unknown, in ways that would be kind and not painful, Yes. And anyway, the next day, of course, resummation, go in, sorting out some more. And at some point, Shri Mataji said, "Oh, Geoffrey, how was the jumper?" And I kind of looked at her, sort of grimacing, smiling. I said, "It was a very good fit, Shri Mataji. Thank you very much." And then she looked at me, and as most yogis will know, she raised her right Vishuddhi finger and wagged it at me and said, "Your mother knows." And of course, that nearly set me off burbling. Ooh. But so again, you just see the delicacy of mother's kindness and her gentle touch in the simplest of things, that we're here for spiritual resurrection, and here she is, we're talking about a jumper.
yes,
And it takes on a significance far beyond that which a jumper should normally take on, but it was through all these moments and gentle exchanges that, of course, the love was transmitted and felt and received. And
also especially because I think, having lived in England, it's all very nice, the language is very good, but the expression of emotions isn't quite the done thing. It's always, the stiff upper lip, or very formal, or sweep it under the carpet. So yeah, it's very sweet how Shri Mataji got around to giving you something.
yes, well, one of the biggest sellers at the pharmacist is a potion called stiff upper lip, and you can apply it if you feel your lips beginning to become less. Stiffen yourself up again.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. It's so sweet to listen to this because it just shows how tender Shri Mataji is, to reach out to you as an Englishman. It's not easy to express emotionally and to accept something either, and her way around it. So beautiful. So how was it that you moved from the buildings to books, the books that we see there? What's the story to that?
Well, I guess that came along a lot later, but
Oh, okay.
yeah, a lot later. In a way that I guess one of the things I wanted to mention was about Ealing,
Please do.
which was perhaps some of the significance, which is if you think of the words E and ling for like linga. So linga, of course, we know is Shiva.
Oh, yes.
And E is, and I looked this up, so don't worry, I'm not that up on my knowledge of Sanskrit, but E is associated with words like seeking or desire,
Yeah.
and
Well, Ishwar, that's God. E.
and,
E.
and yeah, and Linga with Shiva. So it's like getting the house in Ealing, seeking Shiva, seeking God. Very interesting.
Very.
And of course, what happened eventually was the property was fully renovated, and all the properties around it also were uplifted by other people. And it's like the magic dust of Mahalakshmi was sprinkled in one place, and it just emanated out, and you could see it sort of this gentrification of properties, which were all often abandoned, and this one was an abandoned building. Can you imagine? And but anyway, it just that little thing about Ealing. So sometimes we don't necessarily see the import, even in the naming of a town, and why Shri Mataji may end up getting a property there.
That's right.
Another interesting thing which happened in that year, of course, it was the year of the first Royal Albert Hall programme
Oh,
in 1992, which of course was big news because until then the halls we'd been in, Shri Mataji had visited Caxton Hall, Porchester Hall. This was something at an altogether different scale.
yeah.
So tremendous excitement, and that took place 10 or 11 days after the date I'm mentioning, in sort of 11th of June, and there was a two date program on the Thursday and then on the Friday. And Mother didn't give realization on the Thursday. She said to
Oh,
people, "No, you've got to come back tomorrow," and she gave it on the Friday. One of the things in all the tremendous sort of organizing and working out how to fill suddenly a hall with 4,000, one of the elements which hadn't been there before was we came to the realization and proposed to ourselves that we should have a big screen, because when people were sitting in the Albert Hall up in the gods, as it said in theatres, they up in the gods, they're the cheapest seats where you can't see anything, and the realization was that for them Shri Mataji would appear very minuscule on
yeah.
the stage. And we went through this process of saying, but that, people saying, well, those kind of big screens are only used in rock concerts and things like that, gross things like that. This is a deep spiritual event.
Full event, yes.
But thankfully, the proposal prevailed, and we ended up having a big screen above Shri Mataji, sort of 15 meters, 20 meters by 30 meters, whatever, projector.
Oh.
And of course, since then, of course, that kind of protocol at big programs took hold and became a normal thing, a normal addition. We look back now and think, how could you have done it without? But technology was slowly evolving with things like projection and illumination of big screens and so on. So these things were just beginning to manifest as being a bit more available, unless you're in the top end rock and roll business or something like that. So it's interesting how these things were all sort of going on.
Sorry, just taking you back to Shudy Camps. Is there any other experience that you had there? Because, like you said, Ealing, the significance of the name Shudy Camps is like purifying, clearing, isn't it? Like, although in English it's Shudy Camps, it's actually
I guess I haven't, because I spent less time at Shudy Camps. I was more involved at the end of Shudy Camps, sort of
Okay.
bringing it all together and preparing it for sale, including finishing off an inordinate amount of things left unfinished over the first 7 years since 1987.
Wow.
And I remember that Shri Mataji bought Ealing in August, September 92, whenever the completion was. And we started doing works there, and sort of it through September, October, November of that year. Then we went to India tour.
Okay.
We came back in January. Now, Shudy Camps was still there, and it was actually there till about 1994, sort of, I don't know, January, February, March time sometime. But I remember on one occasion being at Ealing, and Shri Mataji telephoned me and said, "We have to sell Shudy Camps now. It's urgent. We've got to do it now. Take whatever we can get. We've got to do it. We've got to," and it's like the world depended on it. And it wasn't about maximizing the money. It was about, it has to be sold now. And so I passed that on to say, you know, we've really got to do this, and advert in the Times and state, blah blah blah. And of course, it did sell, and we and Mother, you know, was able to use that money for other things, and internationally and elsewhere, and as needed. And of course, we then we filled up a lorry. Many lorries left Shudy Camps, but we filled up the last one. And we gathered together a lot of things from Shudy Camps, and also a lot of things that were going to be needed in Cabella.
Uh-huh.
And this was now 94, and we filled this, you know, the lorry up with a ton of chapati flour, a ton of rice, a ton of multi-finish English plaster, over a ton of paints, you know, not pallets, but massive quantities of wallpaper. All these different things went down to Cabella to help the renovation of Cabella. And I remember going with Antonio Charlot to King's Cross area, to the decorating shops, to, we'll have 30 rolls of this and 40 rolls of that, you know, the very ornate papers you see in Cabella. Yeah. Different paints, you know, plaster, of course, for John with the cornicing, and loading all these things onto the lorry, including the elephant.
Including the elephant, wow.
And 3 of us drove down there, myself, Nick, who's no longer around, and Bill, who's passed away. And we drove this lorry, and inadvertently, it was slightly overweight. I won't say by how much, but it was slightly overweight. And we got there, and the import people couldn't deal with us on an arrival, so we had to drive straight to Cabella from Costa and unload everything, and then we had to return with the lorry. And so we had to, Shri Mataji said, "Okay, all the mattresses in the house, everybody get their mattress and load it onto the lorry." And if we loaded a few bits of wallpaper and paint, and you know, so everything on the manifest was covered if somebody wanted to check it. And then I said, "I need an elephant. I need a little wooden elephant." And somebody came out with a little wooden elephant about so high. And just before closing the doors, I put that elephant in, so that when the customs guys opened the door and it says wooden elephant, they could see a wooden elephant. Not knowing that the real wooden elephant was sort of the one we see in the entrance at Cabella. So such playful times we always had with, you know, and the jovialness, and we went up there, and El Ganesh came with us to translate in case needed, and everything worked out, and they weren't even interested in what we were bringing in anyway, and so on and so forth. So we returned with everybody's bedding and mattresses for close of play, and everything was carried back into the castle, and everybody got to sleep. And but yeah, so yes, the selling of Shudy Camps was, you know, I'm sure for many people that was a big thing, because a lot of their seeking and experience had happened through Shudy Camps. And then, you know, the next thing was going to be for another group of people, we're going to be experiencing something through Ealing. And I once went, when this is fast forwarding, but I was once, Shri Mataji was looking at properties again in, you know, the late 90s, And I kind of playfully said to Mother, I said, I thought you'd finished now with properties, And she again got the finger out and she said, "You don't know your mother very well." And that then led on to the next thing and next thing. But that was fast forwarding. What for me, what
There was a bit in all this business of Shudy Camps to Ealing to Cabella, transporting materials and goods. Was there a US tour
well,
in
yes. What
93?
after the next year in 93, we had another Royal Albert Hall in the third one in June of that year, and over the summer, we're coming and going to Cabella. We'd always be at Pujas driving down to Cabella with cars, vans full of chicken legs and lamb for the chicken and lamb biryanis, and the driving of stuff to Cabella. The list would come through from the yoginis in Cabella and fax through, and Antonio Shallow would go and procure a lot of the stuff from the Indian shops, herbs, spices, Indian sweets, and the meat. And we'd then load them all into freezer containers with ice packs in, and have to get them down to Cabella sharpish. And so we were doing that repeatedly, puja after the puja. And eventually, of course, you start to begin to lose the plot when you discover that in the boxes going to Italy, you're finding olive oil, pasta, and garlic. And we're taking olive oil, pasta, and garlic to Italy.
Italy, yes.
Sahastrara Puja or Navaratri Puja or whatever. And you begin to sort of question your sanity in doing all of this. And but anyway, September 93, Shri Mataji was still at Shudy Camps, and we were still working at Ealing. And I received a phone call, probably from David, saying, would I be able to accompany Shri Mataji to Cabella?
So David Spiro.
Yeah. And what are you doing for the next few days? Well, I was working at Ealing, so I was certainly at Mother's disposal. And would I be able to do that? Of course, okay. And in my mind, I was thinking, gosh, that means this person can't do it, that person can't do it, and suddenly I'm being offered into the mix. And of course, I gratefully grabbed hold. And I was actually going to be driving a van down to Cabella, and then instead of me doing that, it was arranged for Mark Bevan to do that, who's currently now in Australia, and that I would fly with Shri Mataji. So yeah, a big and interesting moment for me. And I remember getting on the plane, obviously with all the suitcases and stuff and shirt and tie, and feeling also hot under the collar. And we get on the plane and we sit down, and there wasn't first class plane, but there was business class. So anyway, I was next to Mother, and she, you end up engaging in conversation. And she said, I've heard from Dr. Spiro that you're good at doing public programs. And I said, oh yes, Mother, of course, marvelous fellow, whatever one could say about that stuff. And then she was just asking about my seeking and stuff, and then she got me to hold out my hand, and was starting moving across my lifeline and my fate. I don't know anything about palmistry or reading hands, but I know people do. And Shri Mataji was doing that, and I was thinking, oh gosh, she's seeing everything. She's moving stuff around, looking at it and assessing it and tutting and who knows what. And so she asked me about seeking. So I explained I've been out in Japan and done a bit of looking into Buddhism and this and that and the other. And I've been to India and living in America and blah, blah, blah. Da, 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 da. And yeah, so that's the beginning. And I'm with Shri Mataji sort of suddenly.
Just the two of you. And well, I mean, not the passengers, but the Sahaj.
Yeah, the castle was full to the gunnels with all the yogis, Robert and Natalie and Victor and Purna, Finbar and Elizabeth, and gosh, Alison, and oh, and gosh, anyway,
Lots.
dementia's kicking in. All the yogis that we know as the early Cabella yogis, they were all in the castle. Sanjay was in the mix, and suddenly you're there, and don't quite know what your role is. You've accompanied Mother to Cabella. Now what? And so you just kind of, loiter around and hang around. You end up, finding somewhere to lay your head down in the castle. And I ended up in the carpentry workshop downstairs when it wasn't actively being used for some reason. And so I'd make a bedroll, getting my sleeping bag, and sometimes you'd feel, gosh, that felt like a mouse going over my legs. I hope it was a mouse and not a rat, but you just kind of surrendered to it and enjoyed. And then lo and behold, you get up, shower, go up to Mother's quarters, and all of a sudden you're in Mother's living room while she's having breakfast, and you're just being there to have conversation. Everybody else has gone out to work. The ladies may be there on the floor below. The cooks are looking after some food. But by and large, in those moments, I slowly began to realize that, we were far from the madding crowd. So you had the puja weekends where it was wall-to-wall humanity, a sea of humanity. And then slowly that would dissipate. And by sort of Tuesday morning or Wednesday morning, and it was raining outside and looking a bit grey, you realize you were in this massive castle with nobody around and very much alone.
And God.
Yeah, very, very much sort of in a quiet space. And so I remember, I've told this story before. One occasion, she sort of says, come along, and we'd sit down, and she's got the remote, and she's flicking through the channels, and so up comes some football, and she's watching. I thought, this is rather strange. Is she doing this for me? Because I'm no big football fan at all, really. I was more into rugby and basketball and athletics, so football, whatever. Anyway, she then leans in and says, "Watch this." So okay, I lean in and look, and the guy on one team gets the ball, dribbles up the field, past 2 or 3 people, shoots, and it's a goal. And the whole stadium, half the stadium lights up. And I turned to Mother and I said, "Shri Mataji, you can't do that." And then immediately, because it's a live game, but she's got me. I'm fully reeled in on the fishing, and I'm pulling my ears while saying, "Mother, you can't do that." And she could see the play of it. And then she said, "But see, now it's 1-1 and it's even. There's balance." And I was like, "Oh yes, Mother, yes. That's what it's all about, balance." And then she said, "All the players on the pitch, animals in their last incarnation." And then she went on to say, "And all the audience too, all the crowd too, animals in their last incarnation." And then she clicked it, and we were on to the next thing. And in a way, it was, Shri Mataji's probably seen that element of football hooliganism through the 70s and 80s. So she's seen it in the newspapers in England and stuff. So, but it was a very comedic moment. And of course, not one that my brothers like hearing about, or the Yuvas when they want to have a kick about.
Tell me about it, yes.
So sometimes I'd go there, and the yogis would buy from Milan or Geneva, whether it's Finbar or Robert or Jeremy or Victor. They'd pick up a newspaper, perhaps the Guardian or the Times, from that day, and then bring it back. And then next morning at breakfast, of course, Shri Mataji would read that paper, and she'd sometimes be sort of reading the paper, and then she'd lower the paper, and I was sitting at her feet. She'd lower the paper to take up some conversation on something she's just read, and blah, blah, blah. And eventually, once we'd exhausted that, the paper would go back up again, and she'd be reading away, and I'd be sort of sitting there marveling and whatnot. And every day.
How long was this?
Well, every morning.
It's like a dream come true for you, isn't it? I mean, for anyone listening, it's like, wow, what a lifetime's opportunity.
And my, I had to evolve a daily round for myself, or time box my day, long before time boxing was invented. But I'd wake up, I'd spend time with Shri Mataji in the morning and bring the breakfast in. Perhaps the ladies would bring it to the door. I'd then carry it in and so on and so forth. And then you have these moments of, just daily life, being comfortable, chat. I won't say chatting, but that's it, conversation, companionship nearly. And CCP sometimes would be elsewhere, and Shri Mataji would be there, or sometimes vice versa even. And they were very much just normal moments. So Shri Mataji was seeing what was happening in the world, and then on one story she was just saying, stupid people about some story. And I said, oh, Shri Mataji, I'm writing something at the moment, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. But she then lowered the paper again and said, if you can communicate with these stupid people, then write. And then the paper went back up again. So I thought, oh, does that give me carte blanche now to,
Yes,
this, that, and the other? But it's what my day in Cabella was, and it was all, just evolved, was I'd spend time with Shri Mataji. In the afternoon, she might sleep, and or even into the late afternoon. After I'd go down to the river. Mind you, this was September and October, and I'd go in and I loved to fully immerse in the river. And then by the time I came out, often the lights of Cabella were now beginning to flicker. And of course, it's a darker time of year. And so you had this very just, Italian village nestled on a hillside with the river, and you were just quietly walking through, drip drying on your way back to the castle. And often in the afternoon I would write, and where I'd write and research, it was in the room which has now become the book museum room, you might say. And that room used to be full
study.
Study, and it's got the books of Shri Mataji, and it's got some of the glass cases then. Now that room wasn't used for anything at all in 92, 93, 94, 95, and it was just a glorified storeroom. And it had a bed in there in the early days. And sometimes I'd lie on the bed and I'd look up at the designs on the ceiling and just marvel at them. And they hadn't been touched in years. They were as found, sort of thing. And just look at the different workmanship of the Italian artists, how they make the effect of relief by painting it. And you gosh, wow, that is quite something. They do it externally on buildings throughout Italy. And but I also set myself up a little in the bay window facing the side of the mountain, set up a little desk area. So I'd sit there, pull the shutters back, sit there looking out, and be writing, reading, this, that, and the other. And then I'd spend time with Shri Mataji and eat and go to the river. And this was going on like this and this and this and this. And I was just like, still wondering, all I'd been asked to do was accompany Shri Mataji to Italy. That was that. And now I sort of was building a life for myself, in the moments I had. And I brought a few books with me. And of course, I was able to look in Shri Mataji's sort of fledgling office at that point. There wasn't much to it, you might say, but there was a few books, a few photo albums. Of course, now it's got quite a lot of stuff over the last 30 years. So I'd taken a few things with me to read and look at. And so, yeah, I was doing that. And doing that again, returning to that seeking of working stuff out and presenting things and writing stuff.
What were you writing?
Well, I ended up.
You said you could, if you can talk to those stupid people, then you must write.
Well,
I
ended up writing a book which I entitled Seekers of Truth. And I even got some yogis to illustrate some pictures. So I'd say, this is what I want to depict. This is the pic, and so the picture would look like this, but I'm no artist. So they kindly did some pencil sketches and pen drawings. And it was really just kind of done on the basis of sort of a bit like newspaper articles of discoveries being made, revelations occurring, government inquiries into foot soaking or who knows what. It was done in that sort of silly way so the medium was like a newspaper article. So you had the title, you had subtitles, you had your content, maybe one or two pictures. So, and it was bite-sized chunks. And it was just going through all the different processes of explaining Sahaja Yoga, perhaps in light of the different world traditions, scriptures, quotes from whether it's India, Christianity, Islam, whatever it might be. So I enjoyed doing all that. And all the while I was gently continuing that research to look at the world traditions and scripture to see, did they support the lived experience that we found ourselves living, and that Shri Mataji would espouse, and so it all tied in. And then how can you then give that back to people so that they don't have to read all these tombs? They just get the 3 or 4 key things which have meaning, which have import, which they can use and share and enrich their lives with. So all the writing was a bit like that. And so yeah, it was a fun time to be doing that stuff, very sort of open-ended. And sometimes Shri Mataji would give me a book. I remember she gave me the book by Elaine Pagels. She's a New York professor, called The Gnostic Gospels. And I delved into that, and fabulous read. And Elaine Pagels has gone on to do many other books along, the study of early Christianity, Gnosticism, and different ways of understanding what's been written in some of the Nag Hammadi library and other texts about the advent of Jesus and some of the things recorded, and which of course are all not in the approved canon of Christianity, you might say, because they speak to that which takes people beyond the controlled show, you might say. And another time Shri Mataji gave me and she would say, look at that. She wanted me to get into it and look at it, analyze that. Another one was the Gospel of Thomas. Of course, Thomas, we know, traveled to India, and when the English went there to spread Christianity, they were perplexed to discover Christianity was already there down in Kerala in southern India. And so yeah, the Gospel of Thomas and some wonderful sort of sayings or verses in there, which really that wasn't allowed into the common understanding of what the Catholic or Protestant Christian canon is of. But I learned lots of different things, and one of the things I in reading and researching, of course, was I came to understand that we have the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The only problem is that Mark and Luke never met Christ. So we've got the 4 Gospels, and 2 of the geezers didn't even meet the fella. Go figure. But the Gospels of those who walked with Christ, like Bartholomew or Thomas and ... they're not to be included. But let's take Mark and Luke, who've never met him, under the protection of Uncle Paul, and let's rewrite the Bible. And those kind of revelations struck me as like, wow, I don't think many people clock onto this stuff. We just blindly think Mark and Luke must have been somewhere in the mix somewhere. We don't tend to think that they weren't one of the 12 apostles, And so things like that, and then another thing which struck me about Christianity and all that work I was doing at the time was it was like sending a boat out from a harbour, and if the boat leaves the harbour and it's going at 1 degree off course, then over 2,000 years it's going to be a long way away from where its intended destination was. So they didn't have to nudge the teachings of Christ too far off course to end up completely somewhere else, which is the world we see today. So little things like that. So I enjoyed that, and Mother seemed to gently encourage me with a bit of reading matter go down this route, go down that route, and
especially because in your seeking you'd actually studied other literature, so you could sort of have a comparative of sorts.
Yeah, and she could see I was a head case for it and enjoyed it, and she'd help cure my condition with a bit of the good stuff. I remember I was telling you about the mice running over my legs. It was interesting because in the day you'd be up there in Shri Mataji's royal court upstairs with the carpets and the cornices and the wallpapers and the grandeur. And at night time, I'd be down with the mice in the sawdust and in the carpentry workshop. So it was just a wonderful sort of dichotomy of what was my daily round. Anyway, I was down there in the kitchens before they developed it, and I was looking everywhere. I wanted some oil, some almond oil, some olive oil to anoint the Sahastrara. And this was like 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, and I was going here, going there, and couldn't find anything. Just couldn't. All the stuff, I guess, was upstairs in the mezzanine kitchen. And then, lo and behold, Sandeep appears. And he's coming. I'm walking down out of the kitchen towards the carpentry, and he's coming towards me, and he's got in his hand a small bottle of oil called Anup. And Anup is an Indian oil. It's a bit. It looks like engine oil. It's very thick and viscous and jet black. And he said, Shri Mataji wants you to try this oil, this hair oil. So I said, oh, thank you very much. I've just spent half an hour looking for some oil, so I'm just marveling again at that moment. She sends it, and you put it on, and you've really got to put a towel on your pillow because it goes on like black nearly, or like a very thick thing. And of course, your pillow in the morning is all brown, from this. But it was apparently supposed to stimulate hair growth, which of course I'm not saying I have issues with, but. Anyway, the next day I go up and I'm massaging Shri Mataji's feet, and then she leans forward and she says, "Is it working yet?" And then she sort of with her thumb rubs my hairline and my forehead, rubbing the oil in a bit. And so I thought it was very playful. So of course I kept using this Anup, and I'm not sure if it worked or whether it was another Indian product which was a cure-all, but who knows what was in it. It felt like engine oil at sometimes, and not new, but used engine oil. But it's still out there to this day, Anup, and so these days were coming and going. And I remember another occasion I was there in Shri Mataji's probably bedroom area, and she was sitting and I was walking about doing things, and then and there was a tape on some classical music, and then she asked me, she said, do you like classical music, Indian classical music? And I kind of had to kind of stand in my steps and let me weigh this up. I know I like Led Zeppelin, and I know I like the Beatles and the Beach Boys and Pink Floyd, and do I like Indian classical music? And I know a lot of people don't. A lot of Western people, it does their nut. They're kind of like, oh, or in the early days. I think over time, many people have come to acclimate to it much more and understand much more. But in the early days, it was like, oh, it was difficult to unpack, perhaps. And anyway, I was reflecting on it and considering. I thought, yes, Shri Mataji, I do like Indian classical music, and then we had a little conversation and back and forth. So, also as we know, in everybody Shri Mataji met, she would be quizzing them, observing them, seeing what they brought to the table, seeing that everybody was slightly, had different permutations and combinations of what they were and what they brought in. And sometimes you'd be in a conversation with Shri Mataji about something, and the next thing you'd hear it in a puja talk she was giving, or a public program where the topic or point you'd been dwelling on or raising, suddenly she's integrated it into her daily bread and is sharing it with people so you could see why Shri Mataji was energized by meeting seekers, energized by interacting with humanity, whereas for most of us we'd be exhausted. And how Shri Mataji would always sort of lean into people and say, "What's your name? What do you do?" And in a way where nobody else was asking their name or interested in what they did, but here's this Indian lady, Shri Mataji, sort of paying attention and inquiring as to our station in life and where we're at, whom we are, and what we're about.
Taking interest
Taking
in our little lives. Now, the Indian music thing is really interesting, you point out, because in some of those Cabella pujas, then we have these massive Indian maestros, classical musicians playing for Shri Mataji, wasn't it? Zakir Hussain, Amjad Ali Khan, all these great ustads, Bismillah Khan.
Yeah, I mean, in 92, 93, I mean, Dabu Chowdhury was there, Nishat Khan was there, and you know, for some of the Westerners, like Nishat Khan would come on stage and he'd arrive and he'd start tuning up, and you kind of thought that was the concert. At 30 minutes, he'd say, "Okay, now we'll begin," and you know, and eventually of course, for some Western loving guitar maestros, you hear the sarod and the sitar and you know the jugalbandi, and it's kind of like an extended guitar solo,
Yeah.
exquisite extended guitar solo, and the playfulness of the back and forth between the instruments and the communication, and how Mother would, you know, maneuver that when they were there in Cabella. I mean, so following on from me answering, she then retorted. She said, sort of, you know, Sahaja Yoga wouldn't be possible without music.
Wow.
And so I think that was the setup, that she was just illustrating to me that little golden nugget. And of course, we, in our weekly meetings, we were in a 10-week course now, and one is music and meditation. One is mantra and learning introduction to mantra, but one is music and meditation, where we just gently introduce people to the aspects of music and so on and so forth.
Very useful.
But what then happened was
So how long did this nice routine of being with Mother in the day, you know, in those absolutely beautiful surroundings and bliss, and then going back to your workshop, humble bed, how long did that last, and what happens next?
well, what happened next was I again, Shri Mataji came to know, of course, that I'd spent time in America. I'd been living there for sort of 4 years out of the last 4.5, or 5 years. So I guess within me was a lot of America being reflected in my vibrations rather than a lot of England. And at one point she sort of said, "You've got an American visa. You understand the Americans. You can come with me to America." And I was sort of a bit floored at that. Luckily, I was already on the carpet, so I didn't have far to fall. But you know, it was like, whoa. And you know, on the one hand, wow, what's involved with that? And on the other hand, you know, can I count my lucky stars by the looks of things? And so we, you know, it all came together, and I think we flew from Cabella to London in late September, and then flew on to New York and arrived there on October the 1st, 1992. And this whole period eventually became 40 days and nights, as you said, before I returned to my mundane existence back in the Ealing ashram. But this was a period of 40 days and nights. So and through all that, of course, you know, you become like a sponge to absorb and enjoy and imbibe, and just really you're lifted up. And Mother, of course, to allow you to be useful to her, she clears you out. So a lot of the stuff which is you, which may be unhelpful or jagged or angular, she will gently smooth out and clear out, so that you can be a clearer instrument for her during these moments, and so you get to be the beneficiary of that whilst, you know, participating. And so yes, there was arrived into New York, and then there was always sort of different things, and Mother had a radio interview in I think it was Queens with a you know, an Indian radio station. So we went there and worked on the lady, and then the lady said, "Oh, I've got to finish for my next interview." And Mother said, "Well, who's that?" And the lady said, "Well, it's Debu Chowdhury." And so Shri Mataji said, "Well, you ask him if he knows who I am." And of course, as we were beginning to leave, Debu Chowdhury, of course, arrived and was, you know, completely shocked to meet Shri Mataji in Queens in a radio station, having just, you know, recently been on the stage in Cabella performing for her. And of course, he fell at her feet. He's been gonna, you know, come to be interviewed as the big Indian maestro. Suddenly he's at Mother's feet and everybody's sort of remembering this and that and the other. And the Indian interviewed lady was really sort of taken aback. And what I got a sense of was a little bit of this circuit of the Indian musicians where they were coming hither and thither. We meet them on occasion in Cabella or in India, but their whole lives were circulating the globe and attending and performing and teaching. And but again, it was just a wonderful little chance meeting, slightly out of our normal context of
So
meeting.
it's at the railway station. This is most interesting. That is, or the TV station, wasn't it?
Radio station.
Radio station, and there is Shri Mataji and Devi Chaudhary after having performed in Cabella.
Yeah.
And then this completely stunned interviewer thinking, oh, this is this famous musician, because
And
they are held, in very high regard given the years and amount of practice and dedication they have to their art. And he's falling at Shri Mataji's holy lotus feet. And yes, it must have been familiar.
So, the as you're leaving, you just say the comment is enough said. It's there. It is. That's established mother's bona fides. This lady, and then Monday, October the 4th, was a program at the UN in the evening.
Let's please about it.
And Mother, actually, it's a slightly different public program because Mother conducts the public program through asking questions. So she asks the audience a lot of questions, and then her answers become the body of the talk. And so in that way, it's slightly different. But deep and meaningful things were said in a strong way. And yet, I don't know that it's a public program you'd necessarily think about watching. It's kind of bit more obscure than the Royal Albert Hall or the big LA programs, and so that was you can see it on Amruta, and it's just a slightly different type of public program, so it's worth seeing if you.
Yes, we'll get the link for it, but is there anything that it stands out for you that you could share with us, please?
Well, of course, Mother talked about some of the subjects you can't talk about nowadays, which was astonishing to witness her doing that. And of course it was because the people in the audience were in New York, and that's what was going on socially at that time, and people were wondering whether these things had an impact on one's spiritual path. Another thing which was Binati Suniya is a song had just more or less come out, so the yogis sang that. It was early 90s. We all think Binati Suniya has been there since the dawn of time, but it hasn't. It just come out in the early 90s.
And it was sung at that UN program.
Yeah, by the yogis. Yeah, and then on the way back, Mother wanted to go for a drive around Manhattan, and so that happened. And at that time, Gerald Worth, who's the Austrian composer, was looking after the Calgary Boys Choir in Calgary in Canada.
Canada, yes.
And they just released that year the tape with the what's the song? The Binati Suniya. They'd recorded it, done a rendition of it. So Shri Mataji, and of course it's delightful because he's now got the Calgary Boys Choir to sing Binati Suniya, and it's just got elevating crescendos and this and that. And so it's in the form of a tape, for those who remember audio tapes, and was put into the American limo that we were in, and at full volume, Shri Mataji's listening to this kind of choral orchestral Binati Suniya, traveling through sort of downtown with all the skyscrapers there and the starry heavens, and it was just a little moment post program to just sort of not debrief, decompress, maybe, whatever, quick drive around Manhattan just to clear out and see the sights, and so that was very sweet. And then of course we got home to the hotel, I guess, and because in a way back in 93, it was much more fledgling. There weren't ashrams here, there, and everywhere. Obviously, yogis had their homes, and in one or two cities in Canada or America, there might be an ashram, but often Shri Mataji would be in a hotel or a hotel motel type thing. So we're there and all the yogis are there. And of course, back in those days, we had cutting edge technology like VCRs, and we used to play things like videotapes. And many yogis will know in close proximity to Mother that over the years and in different countries, people have brought in on VCR tapes and then later DVD tapes, perhaps a musical concert or a movie to watch or a good movie. And these would be there. And then because Netflix wasn't there, Shri Mataji might say, let's watch a movie. And you'd have, a choice of, do you want war, action, romance, comedy? There'd be 10 chosen movies, whatever. So on this occasion, we watch a very sweet movie called Leap of Faith, starring Steve Martin. And Steve Martin is kind of portrayed in this as a traveling evangelist. So he's going through the Midwest of America. Hallelujah, praise the Lord, da, da, da. Put your money in this box here. And so he's gathering up donations, and they're traveling like with a circus tent pendle. And Mother's watching this and she's enjoying it, and she's enjoying his dynamism on stage. He kind of sort of walking across stage, he kind of shoots across the stage in dance steps like Michael Jackson whilst going hallelujah and getting people to swoon as he touches them, and they're going, oh, I feel the Lord. And Mother was just so entertained with all this, so much so that we had to rewind it to rewatch some of it because she was just wanted to hear him singing and doing. So it's a safe movie to watch. You can watch it.
Thanks.
While that was going on, I was slightly with my head underneath the dining table, massaging Mother's feet. And she'd given me some sandalwood oil, and I was massaging her feet, toes, ankles, and calf muscle. And sort of moving this movement down, some behind the calf and down. And I was doing this and quite left, right, left. And as I was doing it, I could feel stuff moving inside independently. And I was kind of doing, and Mother kept sort of saying, harder, 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 harder. And I'm carrying on. Now, back when I was young and strong, I used to do the shot put. If you ever the Olympic put, the shot put, I used to throw the discus. And so I was a long time ago stronger than I am now, but I could certainly crush most.
You have that strength.
I could certainly crush most people's hands, and so on and so forth. So Mother's asking me to harder and harder and harder, and I'm like going, and there's stuff moving. It's like little things moving in her legs, and I'm going, ooh. And I'm like, eventually, I sort of say to Mother, Shri Mataji, I'm really concerned if I go any harder, I'm going to pull your leg off. And
you told her that? Or you thought?
So I'm Steve Martin's on stage doing his thing, and I'm doing, and Mother just looks down, sort of leaning with a cheek.
Pose.
She looks down and she said, Geoffrey, these legs are very ancient and they're not going to come off. And then I kind of go zzz, and I just sort of stare into Mother's feet. And now with all the sandalwood, I'm seeing it's kind of like golden or bronzed. And then my attention is taken to the sort of biblical passages of where there's descriptions of God or Jesus where, and I beheld the bronze, brass, burnished feet glimmering with gold. And I'm just sort of doing this going, it's like I was gone. I was a jelly baby. And so in these moments of hilarity and comedy, something else is going on, and Mother's just reminding me, very ancient legs, And
what did it feel like for you? I always wondered how when people used to, have that golden opportunity to touch Mother's feet and massaging like that. What was going on internally? What was the thing before and after, or was it even palpable?
It was definitely palpable. You felt washed.
Mm.
You felt softened. Mother's hand or feet can be so soft that it feels like you're touching cotton wool. It's like you're touching something before you reach the skin that is soft, and and but you get lost into it, just like a whirling dervish would get lost in swirling in dance. You just get lost, and you nearly can disappear into it, sort of thing. And and meanwhile you're feeling this bliss. And I guess you might, I mean, I haven't broken it down like this, but maybe you're feeling, gosh, I'm actually doing something useful for the divine here, beyond my station, beyond my pay grade, but it's a simple thing. And here I am able to do it. I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't, but I can do this, you know.
Wow.
And meanwhile, Mother is sometimes guiding you, but she's through that, she's getting the comfort that stuck vibrations are being released, and you may be absorbing them, or others may be absorbing them, but you are helping with the flow of vibrations, which over the years you got the sense, and Mother's spoken of it, that if the vibrations get blocked up, you know, fit for exploding, it can be a tension or a pain, you know, a stress. So the whole idea of the flow is that, you know, the flow has to be maintained, and sometimes a physical bit of massage might, you know, move a physical block and encourage something along. So whenever one was invited by Mother, of course, you shuffled forward, you know, at double speed, with a big grin on your face, and just got into it, and realized in reality the main beneficiary was going to be you in some shape or form, and through which Mother would move mountains. She would, it was basically, I mean, you know, we say to people at our weekly meeting, we do a 10-week course, and then we sometimes do a few of the chakras afterwards. And on one of them, I can't remember which one it is, but we're talking about the symbology, and I say, you know, isn't this interesting? Oh, it's about the Muladhara one. So in the Muladhara chakra chart, we introduce to people puja, the feet of the divine, and what's the third thing? And the swastika, of course. So we get to talk to them about the swastika with a few graphics. Then we get to talk to them about the feet of the divine. And what's the feet of the divine? Well, I use a few images of where the chakra system is there. And then at the top of the Sahastrara is the imprint of 2 feet. And of course, it's an oft expressed things that, you know, the seeker breaks through the Sahastrara and is finally reached the promised land. And what does the seeker experience or witness? The feet of the divine. So having broken through and arrived, you've arrived to where the feet are. And then of course, for the English audience, I say, you know, do we have any references like that? So I talk about, you know, the Indian system of touching the feet and showing respect. It's commonplace. And I say, of course, we have the hymn in this country, and did those feet. And slowly the dangerous feet become slightly more acceptable, because you give them a few references to cling on to whilst saying, interesting. So in massaging Mother's feet, we're putting ourselves right there at the place of right here. And instead of having to have just padukas, we literally had Mother's feet with her, you know, there are miracle photographs, of course, where sometimes you get the light coming out of the different toes, or the moon at Mother's feet and things like that. And as we know through our own, you know, pujas at home, just washing Mother's feet with perfume and water can, again, gives you that something, doesn't it? It gives, you know, where you're different afterwards. It can
Elevates.
It can be stressful, full of tension, preparing, and then whoosh, the puja begins. You do the doing, and before you know it, you're eating a bit of prasad and going, well, wasn't that jolly easy, simple and effortless, and so on and so forth. But so yeah, those moments, of course, were. And there was lots of them, because when Shri Mataji was traveling by aeroplane and then car, in a way, it's as if sometimes the vibrations got blocked up, because she was on a plane with 300 people, and she would absorb. And so not only foot soaking, but sometimes we'd arrive somewhere and Mother say, can we have a foot soak? And then we'll have a massage to get some of that junk out, which she had just through her own innate nature absorbed from the people around her. And Yes.
Amazing. So did in all these in this travel to America, because that was about the time when, I mean, what we know as World Wide Web was completely nascent. I'm not even sure if that existed in its shape or format as it does now.
Not at all. No. It in a way it was. There was a few people with emails doing a few bits and pieces in the early 90s. And they were speaking to very few people because there was nobody out there with this connectivity. It was often through the corporate world, you know.
Yes.
Companies had intranets, and then, you know, internally a little bit, but certainly not out there. I think my email address dates from 1995, so that's when I first got an email address. I've still got the same one, and
Well done for keeping it, because now they've all sort of add your phone for security, this, that, and the other, isn't it? Just
yeah. So
keep
in
in mind.
those days, everything was done by phone or fax or letter.
So
You know.
did Mataji mention, do you remember anything about how, because she, being who she is, could see that far, and how things have gone for us? I mean, this is still probably the beginning. It's the start of artificial intelligence and our reliance on social media and such like.
Yeah, she not on the tours or moments I was with her. I know she's spoken of it in a public program or a puja because somebody's referenced it to me. That wasn't really flagged up as an issue at all.
No, okay.
Um,
I remember Patty Prohl sharing with us when we did the interviews in 2010 at Blossom Farm. She was talking about the movie where the computers start taking over the human activity, and Shri said to the yogis that were watching with Shri that that's it. If the computers take over, then that's the end. If I mean, it's not verbatim, of course, but something to that effect.
I think in the excerpt, which somebody I floated across my attention recently, she actually said it's very dangerous, and it could be the ending of, if it's mishandled, it could really destroy a lot of stuff. But I don't want to speak further on it because I just heard that in passing. It floated,
Yeah.
and I didn't disagree with it. I could see the warning signs.
Yes.
So the next day after the UN,
Yes.
we boarded the plane to Toronto, which is about an hour, 15 hour, 20 minutes. So I guess we flew out of LaGuardia or New York. And on the way up, Shri Mataji leaned over and she said, are you ready for the program tonight? And I kind of looked at her slightly perplexed and quizzical. And then she added, because you're doing the intro talk. So I'm now next to her. I can't scramble and start making notes and get a pen and paper. I'm like going, yes, Shri Mataji, that shouldn't be a problem. You know, whatever I said. And I'm sure she was giggling inside. But anyway, so we arrived there, and again, we drive out to a hotel in Toronto.
So Toronto, 1993, is it?
Yeah, and it's probably early October, October the 5th. So yeah, it was LaGuardia Airport, and what was interesting about arriving into Canada was the difference between the Vishuddhi,
Yes,
and the sweet Vishuddhi. So the Canadian yogis were an entirely different breed to the New York yogis, who were rough and tumble New Yorkers, and, you know, I won't say Hell's Angels, although Shri Mataji once said New York was the gate of hell. But and you get to Canada, and there's this sweetness which is engulfing nearly in its contrast to just crossing a border. Very interesting. Of course, in terms of chakras, we know why it's expressed. And I remember I'd been to Canada previously, and it took my memory back that when I traveled on the transit in Toronto years before, that in New York, when you're there, people will sit with their legs out fully, taking 5 seats, trying to trip anybody who passed by. And, you know, if you talk, who are you looking at, and all that, that's New York. And sorry to New Yorkers. And then in Canada, they're all sitting sweetly, like they're in a church choir on their seat with their legs tucked in. Very, you know, a completely different thing. and you
considerate of the surroundings and people around.
and
Yeah.
so you could see the difference of the chakras between the central Vishuddhi and the is it right Vishuddhi? Yeah, I guess it's
Right,
right.
Bishop.
Sweetness and whatnot. But so anyway, and Shri Mataji was staying in the Prime Minister's suite at a particular hotel, which had been obtained with a 50% discount and all the usual Sahaja Yoga stuff you come to expect when touring with Shri Mataji, that everything, people are working hard, but eventually stuff works out. And this is when people want to give their best to Mother and express their love in whatever way they can. There's still no physical ashrams or properties, but so a nice hotel suite becomes the hub for the 1 or 2 days that Mother's in town. And I think what was interesting about Toronto back then was all the yogi in the collective were all Indian. So who
Wow.
were in North America? And I think it was Dr. Misra and Jay, I remember, but predominantly all Indian. By the time you get to Vancouver, they're all Western, you know, white Caucasian European immigrants now living in Canada, you know, completely different flavors. So it's interesting that how these demographics sort of play out. And anyway, about 6:30 on that day, Shri Mataji said, are you still here? She kind of like, you've got to get yourself down there and start this program. And I hadn't really met him prior to now, but I came to meet Lothar because he drove me. Lothar, who recently passed away,
Yeah, Lothar, yes.
wife actually, and he drove me there, and it took about 55 minutes. So we arrived about 7:29, and this thing's supposed to start at 7:30.
Amazing.
So I kind of present myself and try and find some yogi that knows something. And I say, oh, has anybody, and there's already about 500 people, 600 people in the room, in the auditorium. And I said, has anybody said anything to the audience? No, that's you. It's your job. So I thought, okay. So I go up and I say, good evening, welcome. We'll be starting in 10 minutes, da, da, da. And I pull away again. I said, have you got a bhajan team for some bhajans perhaps? Yes. Where are they? They're not here yet. And I said, have you got anything else? He said, well, we've got some miracle pictures, some slides. Okay. Can I see them? Well, they're up there in the gods in the projectionist room. Okay, so I'm not going to be seeing those. And so anyway, sure enough, sort of 7:35, whatever, we begin, and you know, an introduction to Sahaja Yoga, and all the normal stuff that I'd do on a Tuesday night in Flood Street at Chelsea, you know. But instead of having 20 people, there's now sort of 750 people, and so it was just I had a microphone in my hand rather than just speaking, you know, verbally, acoustically. And so we finished that, and then no bhajans available for little intermission. So then I say, okay, we're now going to watch a slideshow of some unusual photographs of Shri Mataji. We sometimes refer to them as miracle. You'll see light emanations and interesting swirls and circles, and you know, we'll talk about, is this bad photography or is it something else? And anyway, so we're doing all that, but you know, can we have the first slide, please? I haven't seen it before. And so I'm using language like, so what we can all see here is, and I'm describing what I'm seeing, you know, as if I'm sort of some curate professor having worked with these things all my life. And then we go to the next. And what this slide seems to be illustrating is, you know, the beams of light flowing onto Shri Mataji's Sahasrara, and she's putting a hand up to say, you know, and I'm describing this stuff because I've never seen it before. So we get through that. And then it's like, Shri Mataji still hasn't arrived. So then it's a case of, okay, any questions? So I start taking questions from the audience, and occasionally somebody starts heckling and getting a bit excited, and I'm like going, ooh, trying to steady them down. And then the rest of the audience are shouting at that person saying, if you want to say something else, book yourself out your own hall and get your own audience. And, you know, they were on my side by that point. And still, Shri Mataji hadn't arrived. And now we're you know, instead of sort of 7:30, we're now at 9:15 and still no Shri Mataji. And I'm running out of, you know, things and to do. And then somebody shouts from the audience, tell us about you. So I'm like, okay, but I'm obviously I'm going to make it seeking related. So luckily I was able to tell them, you know, traveling in Japan for Buddhism and this and Zen, and they all make traveling in India, blah, 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 blah. And after a little bit of that, then eventually I was able to say, I understand Shri Mataji's just arrived. It's like, 9 o'clock or something. And Shri Mataji arrives, and everybody stands up beautifully. And I go over to greet her at the side of the stage. And she says, I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry. We got lost and delayed. And she said, what have you told them? And I said, absolutely everything, Shri Mataji. And she said, oh, I'm not needed then. I'm not needed. I said, no, mother, please. I think they would like to receive their self-realization. And so it then ensued, and mother took to the stage and gave a talk and gave realization. And then there was a wonderful incident where mother wanted to take questions from the audience. And so I sat at the front, cross-legged with the microphone, and people would come down. And at one point, and there was yogis left and right stage to sort of stop people ascending the steps of the stage, just to give that bit of security. Anybody who went to the Royal Albert Hall programs remembers wearing a suit and being part of the 16-man hit team squad security to stop people coming on the stage. And anyway, so in Toronto, they had a couple of yogis who probably would blow over with a puff of wind sort of thing, but they were the security. And pull my ears if that was you. And the auditorium was inclined to the back, and suddenly this gentleman stood up, and he was just enormous. He was about 4 foot at the shoulder and about 6'6", and he was in a big trench coat, and he kind of was coming down. And as he walked down, you could feel the center hearts all going. And he came and he tried to ascend the stage and walk up the steps, and the yogi sitting there was going, he wasn't going to do anything about it. And I suddenly said, sir, can you please come here and we'll use this microphone? And luckily he complied. But all the time I was thinking, what am I going to do if he doesn't comply? Because, can I, what can I do? And he luckily walked across. And initially, I didn't give him the microphone. I was holding it. He was saying, and I was telling mother. Then somebody said, give him the microphone. So I'm like, oh. So I gave him the microphone. And he kind of said, I am Chief Agada from Nigeria. And, I came to this country, and my sister came, and she took up with your people, and she was suicidal. And I'm like going, oh, my goodness. What's going to happen? And he said, and your people cured her, and her life's working out and you could feel the audience go poof, because it felt like there was something, a reckoning, a menacing moment. And the whole sort of center heart, how we'd position the yogis on the first 3 rows at the beginning, so you've got friendly fire for the first 3 rows. The center heart there went doof, and throughout the auditorium. And he then continued, and because of his size and his presence, it was like a larger than life moment in a way. And he said, I want to pay you, mother, I want to pay you. And he started taking $100 bills out. And then mother said, what's he doing? I said, Mashati wants to give you some money. Mother saying, no need to pay. And he then said, my sister loves you. I love you, mother. And then he said, why is it you are so powerful? And then mother says, I'm a mother after all, and a mother can do anything. And the rapturous rapports again float through the hole, and the center heart's like doof, and all the yogis are like drenched in sweat from all of this, but relief, that they've swerved, missed the bullet. And so mother was just sitting on stage like, yeah, whatever. And we were all terrified, 10 feet forward, thinking there's, we're going to have something on our hands. And mother's just Bodhi Nam Nam, smiling and working it. And then she invited everybody onto stage, and maybe 150 people came, and she's working on them. And, remember those days when she would invite people up. And but a very, very sweet moment, and of course for me somewhat of a baptism of fire in terms of introducing Shri Mataji and just realizing, now we set programs up where everything's very ordered and orchestrated, and it's a known. And it was a bit kind of organic, it was like you were certainly in a pioneering space. And the tour went on. Within 1 or 2 days, we were flying to Vancouver. And often what would happen in America is that the governors or state officials would be contacted and informed of Shri Mataji's arrival into their city or town, and they would often provide a letter of celebration, marking the occasion, of invitation, a letter of best wishes would be sent, and sometimes those things would be read out, which is something different to you that might happen in England, in Cambridge or Grimsby or Middlesbrough. It would be different, but in America and Canada they had this kind of thing. And Shri Mataji was when she was working on people, she people might say, I'm can't feel anything. Mother would say, it's the Vishuddhi. And then she'd get them in front of everybody else to say, Mother, you are the Holy Spirit. Or if they were Indian and they had, Krishna, Mother, are you Sri Krishna? Are you Rama? Are you Ganesha? Stuff like that. And one woman was, and again, these are like the miraculous moments where, a woman's coming up, she's shaking and she can't cope with herself and she can't feel anything. Mother gets to say this, are you the Holy Spirit? And the lady just falls silent and still, and everybody applauds. And that's just another one of the 10 miracles that just happened in the last 5 minutes while people were, it's and you eventually become somewhat, what's the word? Just you're just seeing this stuff happening and you're not even blinking.
Well, it's the norm, isn't it? You are with the divine and all these things are happening.
Yeah.
And it's just like, wow, amazing.
I think
incredible.
And these are things that if you put you in remembrance of what we know of the time of Christ and his ministry, and one person, Mother would say, the remedy for their ailment is just ask, are you the teacher of all teachers? And the person would duff, and it was oh yeah, one man there, he was a teacher, and he informed Shri Mataji he was partially blind in the left eye, and the remedy, she asked this question, are you the teachers of all teachers? And then after we're doing that for a while, Mother said, how are you? And he said, I can see perfectly.
Wow, this is Vancouver.
And everybody just burst out into applause, because now they're in this realm of the impossible becoming possible. Another one where a guy who'd been into Buddhism and prayer beads and this, that, and the other, and he had a shaven head like a Buddhist, and of course they're find it difficult to break through. And Mother said she got him to repeat the false mantra he'd been given by a false guru until he could no longer say it anymore, and it had gone and he couldn't remember it. So Mother sucked that poison from him in that moment, and then Mother said, you're healed. And then he went on to say, he asked Mother for a name. And of course, if you think of the biblical times, Jesus was giving names, and it's happened in Sahaja Yoga. Even Nanki, my wife, has asked for a name.
Wow.
And was given the name Priya.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And but this guy who was named Mark, and Mother said, can you ask and affirm if Mother was the Maitreya, the future Buddha, the mother of 3 powers, the Buddha of 3 powers of the Mother? And he did that. And Mother said, cleared out. And then he said, can I have a name? And because his name was Mark, Mother named him Markandeya.
Wow.
And then next please. You know, and it was just done as not as matter of fact, but that's how it was, and it was just
certainly significant that the divine is giving a name, isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
what better?
Yeah, it's
Would you like to read from your diaries of those times? Is there something that you'd like to share? It's really nice, these little, what we consider as miracles, but it's a way of life for us, thanks to Shri Mataji. These things that touch the heart so deeply, and her love for us, always.
yes. Yeah, there's all sorts of gentle things along the way, and
Anything you'd like to pick out to share, please?
there was a very sweet program which Majid, when we flew down to Los Angeles, Majid and Akbar arranged a program for the Iranian or Persian yogis. So that was a special sort of thing. And again, she was just, and they were Shia, and she, again, it's an interesting transcript because Mother is talking specifically to Shia Muslims or about the early days of Islam in a way. And that was probably on the, I don't know, the 9th or 10th of October that year in 92. And again, you know, getting into things which you wouldn't normally get into.
It's really interesting because when Shri Mataji, she lived in Lucknow, where she made that lovely house in Nirala Nagar.
Mhm.
And then afterwards there were some Sahaj programs for the Muslim community there, because Lucknow in a sense has lots of Shias and Sunnis. So yes, amazing. So how she brings everyone together.
And so now in flying from Vancouver to Los Angeles, and many will have seen the Audrey Hope Real Women interviews. And the first one was in 1993, Audrey Hope Real Women. And that was delightful. And she was, as you see on stage, very sort of chitty chatty and playful. And we use those videos sometimes to share with people, just people experiencing the vibrations. When Audrey Hope goes, she's doing this, and then she goes, ooh, try that at home, everybody. It's very, very, very joyful because she wasn't expecting to feel what she began to feel there. And then they get the drama. The next people want the studio, and then Audrey Hope saying, negotiating with her producer and director, can we carry on for another half an hour, get another episode, and we got the money to pay for it. And Mother's sitting, you know, and the yogis are like, we're seeing all this. And of course, it's when you know, I was recently watching the Chosen, the video, you know, the story of Christ and stuff. And whenever he was out, you know, telling the crowds, all the 12 apostles are sitting by gleefully. Their man is now, you know, he's got an audience. And we would be the same when Shri Mataji was being interviewed or in a situation. We'd be full of delight because she was really, you know, delivering the goods, you would say, and making whole that which you were yourself part and parcel of, you know, making it real, making it valid to those who had ears to hear, you know, at least. And so yeah, that was fun in LA. And then there was I think on Tuesday the 12th, the Native American Indians, I'm not sure it was the 12th, I imagine it was the 12th, but the Native American Indians came to meet with Shri Mataji, and they were from the Gabrielino and Shoshone and Togua nations, so 3 different nations, 3 different representatives. And they came, of course, with the regalia. So wearing the headdress and some of the jacket and items hanging from the front of the chest and whatnot. And they also gave Mother a gift of sage plant, which is a ceremonial plant used by the American Indians in a lot of ceremonies. And one of they'd sought Mother out and wanted to meet, partially because their sacred valley where all this stuff grows was going to be developed by an Indian. and they kind of thought maybe Shri Mataji may have some agency, some capacity to talk to this said Indian to, you know, push back or reduce the size of this development, whatever it was in this valley where the sacred sage plant grew. But the conversation kind of moved on, and of course it was, you know, Shri Mataji asked about their nations, and one gentleman said, well, we were, you know, 10,000 strong, and now we're only 200 strong. You know, that when the Westerners came, they forced us, the Catholics forced us to build their churches and stuff. And Shri Mataji said, but you didn't do their religion, did you? And they said, no. And of course, it was a great day to be a white Yorkshireman, because you had Shri Mataji, an Indian from India, and you had the American Indians from America. And who was the elephant in the room? The white Yorkshireman, representing the white man. And if there was any day I wished I could transform myself into a piece of furniture, that was it. Because of course it was a difficult space to be in, but there it was, and they were at Mother's feet, and you know, they were asking, how do we reach out? How do we make a change in the world? How do we hang on and bring ourselves together? We're all scattered to the winds. And Shri Mataji was saying, just hold your hands out. And then they just, having done so, they then just looked at their hands. She didn't say anything else. They just looked at their hands, because they could feel it straight away. They were deep pools. They were deep, and they were silent within. And it was very humbling, of course. And Shri Mataji then said, look at my face. They call me Nepali because I've got a round face. And she said, long time back, my ancestors traveled across the Bering Straits and came into the Americas. And she said, look at your face. Same. And everybody just went looking at each other, looking at their hands, sort of marveling at this very remarkable little moment tucked away on a Tuesday afternoon in a hotel room in Los Angeles, far from the madding crowd. And you could feel Mother's compassion towards them just flowing and emanating. And you could feel their deep love for her and their capacity for absorption. They were absorbing. And you just felt like, gosh, these guys are, you know, realized 10 times over already before they walked in the room. And now this. And so, yeah, just these little moments in time where things like that occur, and it's like takes your breath away, and you kind of, and then yeah, you know, mother was just enjoying them, and in a way, I think she said, you are ancient people, you are ancient people. And I think some of the American yogis who've been working with the Native American Indians, and I think Mother said that the Hopi tribe were very close or had achieved realization through their own, you know, traditions and their own lived experience. And so, yeah, it was, that's part of America. Of course, we didn't see much on the tour. We were seeing the modern America rather than the indigenous ancient America. And then there was suddenly you find yourself a day later or so on the red-eye flight going against the clock, traveling from LA to Washington. There was a couple of programs there. There was one for politicians, of course, and often programs would be organized to bring in names and faces and important people. And then you end up with a situation where it's gently disappointing because all those important people are held in Congress voting. So you get the sort of second tranche of administrators who are coming in. So of course, mother's pleased, but you know, it's like in Washington, DC at this particular event, there was like 20 people, 15, 20 people. And then you think, well, we get more than that in our Leamington Spa meeting, you know. But because when you hear the words Washington and New York, and it's big, isn't it? It's Los Angeles, it's big. And sometimes the programs were held and Mother would go with all that love and attention, and then the audience wouldn't come because they weren't ready, or, you know, they hadn't got to hear.
America, isn't it? Tough.
Yeah, it was tough. And to me, that wasn't the toughest, but that year, that's another story. What the toughest one? But the in the evening, we had a wonderful moment with Shri Mataji, which is it's pertinent now because we've just come through Navaratri. But we in the evening we enjoyed watching the Ramayana, the Legend of Prince Rama, the animation cartoon, which was produced jointly, I think, in Japan, maybe India, in 1993. So here we are in 1993, and it had been displayed at the Vancouver International Film Festival in 1993, and somebody had got a copy, not for distribution and all of that, and we were able to watch that wonderful thing. So if you've never seen I'm sure most people have seen it, but it's a wonderful portrayal and easy to absorb sort of cartoon animation of the Ramayana.
Was this during Navratri time, Jeff?
Well, that no, because Navaratri was still ahead of us.
Okay.
This was October, but Navaratri was further ahead by a few weeks. But again, it was a great little moment, and I remember, watching through the early 90s that cartoon 10, 20 times.
Yes, it's a very nice production. And actually, during this time of Navaratri, what happens in the cities and towns and villages is they have local plays of Ramayana being enacted by boys being the actors, and then the actor who's playing Rama then shoots the arrow that kills the Ravana. So it's depicted symbolically in the villages, at least in the north of India that I'm aware of. So it's really interesting how Shri Mataji sort of brought
Well,
it all
can you
together.
imagine the delight? There she is in Washington, D.C., seeing this wonderfully produced thing, celebrating that's Indian tradition, that story. I mean, what a delight. And surrounded by all the yogis on hand, staying up late into the night. And, next day, another public program, a proper public program rather than an invitation only one. And then jumping in cars and driving up to Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, as it was called, and Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. I think they were big steel towns in America, very, working class, salt of the earth sort of thing. And a public program in Philadelphia, and that was the first one ever in Philadelphia in 1993. And then jumping in cars and driving up to New York from Philadelphia. So we drove up the East Coast rather than took the planes, and arriving at 4 a.m. and falling into bed somewhere.
How long was it then, the journey? Because it's a big continent.
Well, those journeys were, you might be 5 or 6 hour drives, Washington to Philly to, given traffic conditions and a few stops along the way and not breaking the speed limit. And of course, in a way, they were kind of night trains. There was 2 or 3 cars in procession, all, following on from a big event, all buzzing and traveling up the interstate, and just feeling kind of like you were on the move. And again, watch this story. I've been watching The Chosen, where you see the apostles like, where are we going? What are we doing? When are we going here? When are we going there? When, so that Jesus could go and say the word somewhere in a new town. And we yogis were in a way the same. We were so excited and to be part and parcel. And of course, everywhere you went, or certainly I was very lucky, because everywhere you went with Mother, you got to eat out of her kitchen.
Yes.
And so Shri Mataji exists in the world where Maharashtrian food is served everywhere globally. and so in every town and city you'd go to in that hotel, the Indian sisters and the rest of it, they'd be providing these wonderful, nourishing, delightful Indian cuisine, traditional Maharashtrian cooking with the breads and the everything. And luckily, I love Indian food, so it was a real treat.
You didn't miss your English breakfast.
I did not.
Fish and chips.
Unlike that advert where the guy cries when he arrives on holiday and his suitcase full of baked beans has been lost, I was not at all upset. And it was difficult whilst doing all this running around, keeping the weight off, because of course the there was so much delicious food, and it was all, you know, at its pinnacle of production. And yeah, so and all everywhere you go, you'd see the local collective sort of rushing into the hotel space with ironing boards and washing and everything, bringing in, as we know, and just creating this cocoon, this temporary cocoon, this moment of building something up for a few days while Mother was there, and then breaking it all down as she left town and went to the next one. And
give us please give us a sense of the local collectives in various places in America, because this is like nearly 30 years ago now.
Well, yeah, I mean, I that's another thing I really feel privileged to, because when you travel with Shri Mataji, suddenly people think, well, they must be okay, or they can't be that bad. So they'll talk to you, they'll want to know a bit about you, and so you get to meet and greet and break bread with people who often, when we sometimes travel and meet each other internationally, we're just passing in the night and we're buzzing, and you don't get to know people. So on the tour and around Mother, you get to spend time with people, and there's a lot of leg pulling and teasing and joyful frivolity and all of that. And so yeah, but one of the things I got a sense of was that certainly back then in '93, it's as if Shri Mataji had positioned particularly quite a few Indian yogis, not exhaustively, but as like swayambhus. And they were like holding the tent pole, you know, for that town or area. There were others joining in and stuff, but Mother would come every year, as she'd come to England, Italy, and sort of clear us out, charge us up, smack us around, raise our systems, send us out again. And in America, you could see that was particularly what was going on, because otherwise the landscape was such a difficult landscape for seekers to come along. There was so much going on. The attention was so fractious. People's attention back then, this was pre-Wi-Fi, pre-mobile phone, pre-online streaming, the attention was all over the place, into everything. So to get people to focus and acclimate to one thing, very difficult. And so it was I would say, you know, those guys are real sort of spiritual warriors, in that they're tenacious, sticking with it. And even when people, you know, people would show up, of course, for Mother and Darshan, and then we'd be back to the three of us the next week, sort of thing, or whatever it was. And but sometime in the later stories, perhaps I'll speak to that, because I did see at one time, after great tribulation, you might say, stuff working out to build and grow the collective, which was fascinating to see, but not without Mother's, you know, strong power of intention behind it, and she putting herself through a lot to deliver that. But that may be for a later time. Another time I you know, Shri Mataji did a program in on a Saturday. Now we get to New York, she does the program there, and it's a big program at the corner of Central Park, in a big hall. Can't remember the name of the hall. It felt like a big hall. Oh, it was the New York Society for Ethical Culture. So anyway, there had to be 600, 700, 800 people there, 750. So it was a big moment, and there were hecklers and there were people. If you hear the audio, you'll hear maybe in the Q&A people sort of remonstrating with Mother and trying to bring some things associated with the Muladhara chakra and modern living into the mix. And Shri Mataji was sort of so diplomatically saying, you know, these are private matters, and if you like, we can talk about it afterwards, but they're private matters, aren't they? You know, you wouldn't want to discuss all that in front, you know, they were there to cause difficulty, you would see, and Mother just so well handled them in a way. And but it was, you always felt like there was so much in the audience where people were this, that, and the other, and Mother was up against it to settle them. And again, I've seen in some episodes of The Chosen, where we're getting into series 4 or whatever now, where Jesus is saying to them, now you're going to go out, but they're now all opposing us. They're all against us. I've come out of the world, and I've made you come out of the world, but the world doesn't want to receive us. And I'm only mentioning that, so we saw that last night. And it's sometimes with those public programs, sometimes we, with our flowers and the music, and it's the sweetness and the blue skies and the sunshine, it goes well. Some of those dark nights in America, Mother was, you know, at the edge of civilization, you might say.
Actually, yeah, it's a contrast, isn't it? Because the capitalist, there's no ism here, but that mentality that you can't get anything for free, especially when it comes to spirituality and divine being and God's powers and self-realization. So that appreciation is not there. And contrast that with the deep knowledge of those Native Americans, where they were just absorbing all that Mother was radiating, and that power of her love, isn't it? I mean, and yet I know you have.
You reminded me of a story, and it may not be from 1998, it may be from one of the early years, 96 or 97, but it speaks to what that thing you've just brought up, which is about the money side. So there was an occasion where some gentlemen were invited to meet with Shri Mataji, and Sir was there listening, and Manoj and various other yogis. I think Dave was there, Dave Dunphy, Manoj, and they were sort of meeting with Mother to see how they could better improve attendance at events. Let's coin it as like marketing. And they were saying this and that, and eventually it boiled down to the only thing we can offer you is you have to charge money. If you charge money, we'll get you people. And they were going back and forth, and Mother was gently rebuffing them, and Sir CP was sort of just watching the play, you might say, and to see that there was fair play. And I didn't participate. I was just on the periphery, just watching and listening. And then I eventually just thought, I can't stand this. I can't stand this any longer. So I sort of leant in and said, could I just say something? And then I said something along the lines of the following. I said, you know, this lady, I said, in a way, you know, Buddha didn't charge anybody for, you know what I'm going to say, Jesus didn't charge, Muhammad didn't charge. And in the same way, this lady you see sitting before you here cannot charge for this experience. And they were just like stunned into like, what have you said? What have you said? And Shri Mataji was just gently smiling, sort of thing. And that was it. It kind of put it, we were like 2.5, 3 hours in at this point, and then it put that to bed. And then it said, okay, let's look at some other options, you know, and nothing really became of it. But anyway, the next day, you know, taking some plate of food into Shri Mataji, and Shri Mataji just, she said, oh yes, thank you very much for what you said yesterday. Yes, it was, you know, and she was appreciating that, you know, at least we knew, and that some of her teachings had reached our ears if it wasn't reaching their ears. And but yeah, that has been an issue. I mean, I've often said, you know, if we could just say it's £10 in, but full refund upon arrival, or
Yes.
or we'll just take a load of £5 notes and attach them to leaflets and say, come along, here's your £5 for your tube fare. At least you might, you know, because it just seems to be such a hard task discovering those who've got ears to hear and eyes to see, the seekers. And
absolutely. And it kind of reminded one of, you know, when in the 70s, early 70s, when Shri Mataji talked to the early yogis in England, and that room full of seekers, and yet they were questioning her so much. And then Gregoire said, forgive them, Mother, for they don't know not who they're talking to, something to that effect. And then Pat said, yes, Mother, he stood up, and Pat said, I'll give up the drugs, or something to that effect, to take to this spiritual life. And here we are 20 years later in America, nearly, and a repeat. And so human beings with their small minds and constructs, it's not quite easy to appreciate even what's coming at no cost for their own good, isn't it?
I mean, every yogi planet-wide faces the same thing, because ultimately we're all human beings, and human beings in every culture have all right, they have different sets of conditionings and scenarios, but ultimately they have the same challenges, that the subtle stuff is within them, but also all the other conditionings and ego and the human part of us is causing difficulties for us in terms of our spiritual ascent. And but everything should happen at the time it should happen. So one guy asked a question in the Manhattan program. He said, why is falling in love so painful, Shri Mataji? And Shri Mataji said, it's because you fall. You should rise in love. And then somebody said, have you had any disappointments? And Shri Mataji said, I've neither had any appointments or any disappointments. So, people raw their appreciation because they can see she's taking this, incisive question and just playing with it and giving it back in a sweet way. There was another occasion in New York where we went to see the mayor of Yonkers. So we're getting to the politician here, and I think it's Andrea Cousins organised this. Was it? I think so, because she worked in the office there as a politician herself. Anyway, we meet go up to Yonkers, which is a north district of Manhattan. It's they've got the 5 boroughs, and Yonkers is at the north side of it. And the husband and the 2 children got realization very readily. The husband, having got it, was a bit dismissive anyway, as men are known to be. But the children were like, oh. Meanwhile, the wife, she was struggling with it, and she couldn't quite get it. So mother had her come and sit in front of her and at mother's feet. And mother was working on her and talking to her and this and that. And mother was working, instructing me to work on her at the back, and all of a sudden the mayor's wife just burst into tears, burst out crying and sobbing. Of course, and mother had been asking the children to feel above her head and raise it and do what I was doing, and they were doing it. The mayor was looking on a bit concerned. And then she burst out into tears, and the mayor's like, oh. And then I start crying. So then I burst into tears, and then mother sort of turns to me, sort of, why are you crying? And I say, mother, I just am feeling collectively conscious with what she's experiencing. I'm feeling it, because mother was like, don't get caught up, sort of thing. And then she turned it around. She said, you see, you've got a brother here already. He's feeling that collective consciousness dimension. And I'm like, doing this, trying to stop crying and come back to being on duty. And she's crying, and the children are feeling, and oh, mummy, can you not feel it? Very, very sweet moments. So Shri Mataji would, from the big audiences to the individuals, whatever appointments yogis would say could be useful, could be productive, could be helpful, or had been sought, mother would always cater and where possible, allow for that and take those things on more, because you would never be sure again which seeds would take root and blossom, and which would be blow away in the wind, sort of thing. And
it would have been quite a delicate situation, with the husband watching his wife breaking down in tears, and then you joining the fray, so to say.
Yeah. So in a way, it's it was just such a rarefied situation, and I guess maybe it spoke to my centre heart, which was still clearing and working out, which I was aware of. And then in these moments, so that then that was on the Saturday, and then we're supposed to be flying to London on Sunday, and then a last minute program gets organised in Queens, one of the other boroughs, on Sunday afternoon at an Indian sort of community centre temple. And Philip Zeiss was over from Germany, so he went to do the intro to that. Meanwhile, a team of us are packing up the suitcases and everything, of which there were 23. So just
the shopping as well happened there.
Shopping and every presence. Now, Anthony Visconti from Italy was also on the tour, and And so when we eventually we got all these 20 and the handbags, you know, the vanity case and all the other bags and the bag of sandwiches for the plane trip, and you know, and we went off to the airport. Now they wouldn't let us check anything in until they'd seen the whites of mother's eyes, sort of thing, and CCP. So we now got all this luggage, you know, stretching from here to Timbuktu, and time's ticking, and mother's in Queens, just round the corner from JFK at another public road, and everything's sort of at an impasse. And you know, I for one, there was beads of perspiration and stress, and you know, how are we going to maneuver this one? How are we going to manage this one? And then, you know, sure enough, mother comes, and suddenly all the bags are on, and then we land up in Heathrow, and stacking those. I got two trolleys, and I think Anthony had one. And I mean, 7 suitcases on each trolley. I had something like that, 7 or 8, and the stuff hanging off my arms and shoulders from the handbag. And we're going forward, and I'm struggling to control these two. And Anthony's got this other one loaded like a 10 camels. And just as we're coming along, mother just says, wait a minute. And she nips into a cloakroom. So she goes in, the door closes, and just as the door closes, it opens again and mother's coming out. And then she says, okay, now we can go. And it's like she'd just put on some sort of invisibility cloak or protection so that this transit van full of suitcases on 3 trolleys following this Indian lady would not be stopped and looked at. And we just kind of walked through unseen. And I was like, oh, and Anthony was looking at me like, does she normally do this? And I said, well, yeah, you kind of see this thing going on. And so we made our wonderful passage through. And of course, it's all the time on the America tour, because of the time of year, Shri Mataji would often ask, because you wouldn't be told, but she'd ask, can you ask the air hostess what's the temperature at the airport ahead, whether it's Vancouver or Toronto or London? And the temperatures would always come back as being really low, you know, 5 degrees, 4 degrees. And mother would go, and then she'd give bandan. Sometimes she'd raise her right side. Sometimes, having done that, she'd then say, ask again. And then sometimes the guys would come on the cockpit and say, well, interestingly enough, the weather in Toronto is turned out quite bright and sunny, and and mother would just look and smile, and so she would say, you know, the sun is behaving, or the sun is very obedient, she would say, things like that. And so you just get these little moments of she was being practical, you know, so that when she arrived, because can you imagine the amount of traveling mother did, hot, cold, wind, rain, boom, boom, boom. You know, if you weren't stricken with a common cold 7 times a week, you know, through all of that and the air on the aeroplanes, and people used to smoke back then. Can you imagine that? So Shri Mataji's sitting in the plane, people smoking, they're drinking, it's all going on in first class or elsewhere. And she had to be in amongst all of that. And absorbing, and you know, very sort of interesting to consider in a way.
Yes, gosh, yes, yeah. We forget now. We take it for granted. No smoking, no liquids above 100 ml in the handbags, no food and stuff like that, isn't it? But back then it was quite free, and not everything in a good way, isn't it? So
Well, you sometimes felt ashamed.
Yeah.
That we were putting mother through all this in a way where you were ashamed of what you realize your society, your civilization, where it was at, and where you were at, perhaps, and that mother was, in a way, it was like she was going into a salvage yard to try and get some decent carburetors and wheels to make maybe a car up here and there. That was our civilization, you might say, and she was infusing into it this, you know, the miracle. You know, mother, you know, in one of the puja talks that year she was in America, she was saying, you know, yeah, we it's no point doing miracles. What's the point? People don't gravitate, they don't sit, they don't settle. They have their blessing, their healing, their transformation. Then they go back to those behaviors or scenarios. So she said, you know, that's why I've stopped doing miracles. It's not that she couldn't do them. She'd kind of saying it's a waste of time. And again, I was watching this with The Chosen, where Jesus was doing these outward signs and wonders. They were called signs and wonders for people to see and cognize and see with their own eyes and go, "Ooh, what is this? And who could this gentleman be?" And of course, it made me think that the miracle of Sahaja Yoga is, of course, that instead of the miracle happening out there in front of you, it's always now happening within. And it's happening within each person, the miracle, of course, of the Kundalini awakening. And so it's like the miracle can be, you know, experienced at will nearly daily. It can be nourished, it can be shared, and it's within you. It's not dependent on somebody being cured of blindness or hearing or being able to walk. The miracle is actually this very simple, sweet manifestation, this awakening.
Ready and available for anyone who's happy to have it, basically. I mean, to think the amount of hardships and problems that Shri Mataji has encountered and the trouble she has taken for us to have this at such an easy, sort of instantaneous way. And when we read about the old scriptures and things in India, to see how those gurus would be so selective about giving that one person their self-realization after putting them through so much of physical, mental, God knows what all hardships and tests. I mean, we've got it on a platter, and she's just so benevolent, isn't it? And
And yeah, it's you know, some people may say, well, Shri Mataji, you know, we put her through it, we made her work hard, we were so difficult customers, whatever it is, and yet it also was the sole purpose of the incarnation.
yeah, I think it was part of her play. It is part of her play, isn't it?
The only reason she's here was to go through that for us to achieve. And in a way, I remember I worked on creating a puja booklet back in 2009 or something, and I stayed up night after night after night after night, because it's not written, it's all mother's quotes about puja. What's puja? And of course, can you imagine the amount of talks you've got to trawl through and this was before Amruta.
Yes, so you couldn't do your search.
You can't press a button and have it all generated. You've got to read through old, you know, Divine Corporees and what's the Indian one called, and and old transcripts, and to find this stuff. And so I was up every night for nine or 10 nights till sometimes 3 or 4, sometimes till 9 a.m. in the morning. I thought, I think I'm losing the plot here. I think I've, you know, got a bad case of ... But the last verse which I included was Mother talking about the fact that she's incarnated 10,000 times to achieve all of the above, to achieve all of the above. And then when you read that, you realize it's not that she came here to do a bit of plain sailing and lie on a hammock and look at the heavens and read poetry. She came here to do this incredible task and work, which she's been working on and nuancing through countless incarnations, tapping the ship to the left and to the right so it's back on track, and making some adjustments to the sails to bring us to where we are now, the blossom time. And you know, it's, yeah, we perceive fragments of it, really. We perceive fragments. And one of the things just in that period of this 40 days, you know, from July 15th or August 15th or September 15th to October 25th. I just found out today it was 40 days. And I thought, oh, another spiritual significance.
Yeah.
But through all that, I kind of thought to myself, wow, if every word Mother had uttered was recorded at that period, you'd have something larger than the New Testament every 2 weeks.
Absolutely.
And then you realize that I wasn't there for everything, even though I was traveling with Mother, because she might nip through a door and have a chat with somebody, or you know, I may be sleeping and she's awoken and having a meeting with something, and it's constantly going on. She's meeting people, she's engaging, she's counseling, she's comforting, she's redeeming, and it's just unending. And so the end of the tours, you of course you think, yeah, I used to be quite athletic, I'd run a lot, I'd play basketball, play rugby, throw the discus, throw the shot. I'm mullered, and Shri Mataji's off on the next journey.
Yes.
Untouched and unfazed by all of this churning of the ocean that you've been through. And you kind of go, I need some time off.
So this is very important, actually, how, not only has Shri Mataji made it possible for us to have things so easily, a spiritual life, which is simple, dharmic and everything, but also she has taken us so swiftly and gently above our, human limitations of color, caste, countries, all those kind of things. And there is this beautiful power of love that we feel all due to her, isn't it? So
I'm afraid so.
So what was those shopping for presents and other things, those 23 suitcases? Is there any instance that you can remember that you want to share with us in 1993 tour with Shri Mataji?
Well, it was, yes, sometimes Shri Mataji would be invited to a wholesaler or an outlet, arranged possibly through the local yogis who, Mother had said, can we get some of this or that? And you'd go there, and then you'd walk in with Mother, and maybe the shop would be closed, and things would then be brought out to show Mother and this and that and presented to her. A bit like happens in India anyway. If you go into a sari shop, before you know it, you're looking at 10 different saris and you wanted a Nehru hat instead or whatever. But, and when you're there, Mother might start saying, oh, that's interesting. And she might pluck out one thing. And then what you find yourself doing to please her is you go into this big bucket of things and you try and pull out the other 25 of that one thing. So say, oh, they've got lots of them, Mother, not just the one that pleases you, but we've got a whole. It reminds me of the story when Mother let it be known she liked mozzarella cheese.
Right.
And then everywhere she travels, the only thing on the menu is mozzarella cheese. And so when you're shopping with Mother, if she puts her attention on this or that or the other, you follow her attention, and suddenly you see the thing she's looking at in a new way. Something you wouldn't have looked at has suddenly become glorious and wonderful because Mother's cast her attention onto it. And so you get these, everything's kind of uplifted. And of course, for the shopkeepers involved, it must be, a whirlwind of, and then what happens is the decisions are made, and then not that we don't pull anything away with us, but they say they'll have the 27 boxes shipped to the address, and then everything's got to go into suitcases. So Mother would buy, again, things to give to yogis, to her children at puja. Some of the English yogis might remember Mother inviting all the men to take a tie from the stage, all the ties were laid out, and everybody just sit there, oh, I'm not worthy, and Mother saying, come along. And then, the deeper ones would want to stay till the end to be deep and take the last tie, and all these different things going on. But Mother was just trying to show, trying to give, and saris and Punjabis, and interestingly for Indians, she would buy Western trousers and Western shirts, you see, and you kind of think, well, that looks a bit whatever, but it probably come from India in the first place. Now she's buying it. Now she was buying it in Canada, probably manufactured in India, taking back to Ganapatipuli and giving to the Indian brothers and sisters there. Wow. And of course, the amount of stories people have of schlepping, these goods around the planet to Mother, to infuse them and vibrate them, to both vibrate commerce and merchandising, and to vibrate the artists and the producers, and to every aspect of it was kind of getting a workout and being sort of elevated. And for example, Al Ganesh used to be there for Shri Mataji so much in the 90s and 80s, and I saw Mother, and she was there, much more so than anybody else, you might say. I don't think anybody can disagree with that for a certain period of time. And that used to happen across the years. Different people would suddenly be all the time there, and then perhaps later they weren't there at all. But and Mother was looking in a shop window with me at jewelry.
Wow.
Now I may be a big guru on carburetors or bicycle tires or whatever, but jewelry, you only have to ask my wife. I know zero about anything to do with it. I just don't understand it. And Shri Mataji's sort of looking at wonderful necklaces in America. Said, I'd like to get something for Alga. And she's looking, at things with like prices on it, like $4,000. And I'm kind of fainting and going, I'm not going to be able to contribute to this conversation at all, because I don't understand what we're doing here. Nothing's computing. My brain doesn't have those faculties within it. And so I would see the playful side of that. I'd see the playful side of that, sometimes you'd get to just be there and realize how useless you were. And I'm sure Mother would be slightly entertained by it as well, while you were trying to be all the time useful and productive.
As well as probably, prepare you to present such things to nice Nanki.
Yes.
Did you ever put that into practice?
I'm a slow learner, I would say. I'm a slow learner. I'm a learner driver. And but yeah, it's the other thing is, of course, that she would, in a way, Shri Mataji was because she was devoting herself to spirituality, was away from her family, sometimes away from CCP. Obviously, her daughters were married, but she'd be away from them much more so than if she was they were all living in the same village, and her grandchildren, and the things that she would, the love she would kind of inculcate into the things she got for them, and gifts and stuff, and how much pleasure. I mean, Shri Mataji would often say the best thing about money or possessions is in the giving of, and Shri Mataji was forever giving and presenting and being benevolent in that way, being very generous. And so yeah, you'd get to see that and you go, wow, that's very sweet. That's very sweet to see that. And because I think in England it's kind of, if somebody comes to your house, they'll be lucky to get past the doorstep. They're not going to be invited in as as God is visiting, namaste, come in and take the master's chair. They're going to be held back at the doorstep saying, and this could be your own family, what do you want? Why are you here?
Yeah, what's the motive?
This is my castle. The house is the castle, not to be entered.
Yes, and to be fair, unless you were that Spanish professor who wrote that Gita book, the penguin.
Bhagavad Gita.
Jose.
And Mascaras.
Mascara, yeah. Yeah, so yeah, the exceptional cases rather than the rule, isn't it?
Sadly.
Okay, so this completes the America tour 1993. Is that fair to say?
Hopefully.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
To
sum it up?
I think it was, well, for me, it was one of those wonderful life-changing opportunities, which was a tremendous blessing. And in a way, everything I ever enjoyed or imbibed, I've tried to make use of in the years since in what I say or do regarding reaching out to seekers or being kind to seekers or public programs or whatever, and within the collective life. And it's in a way, when you've had that moment, you feel an enormous debt of gratitude, which you will spend your whole life working through in a way.
Absolutely. And also it must have felt so fulfilling, for lack of a better word, for when you were seeking and working in America, to being there with Shri Mataji in all those places.
Yeah, and also because that company I worked with, I'd mentioned Dale Carnegie. One of the facets of that company is communications and presenting and all of that, and self-confidence. And in a way, just per chance, that little bit of opportunity I'd had there was very useful when I came to Sahaja Yogi. So when Shri Mataji turned to me on the plane and said, "Are you ready for the program tonight? You're doing it," I was able to remain relatively calm and thinking, well, I can probably figure out and hold my own and do it without freaking out and disappearing. And so that was very playfully helpful to my journey as well. And again, so hopefully it's been useful in the realm of Sahaja Yoga. I know most people who know me want to diminish the amount of time I have with the microphone, because they know once I get one, I become connected to it. But
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing this beautiful trip with the Adishakti herself. I mean, we can only just, it's nice that you've put so many details, because it's like brought it all alive for us, like we were there. So that's really, really good. Thank you for that.
well, yeah, if hopefully you've had enough, but if not, we can do some more at a future date from